I planned everything for our 10th anniversary trip. 2 weeks later, my husband announced he was going on a luxury cruise with his teenage daughter and his ex-wife on that exact day. No explanation. No apology. Then he texted me, "My daughter needs both her parents there. Stop being petty and unblock the joint card. I will pay you back." I smiled and replied. The moment he read my message, his face went pale. Have you ever realized the person you love is building a brand new life using your money? Let me know your age and where you are listening from in the comments below. Welcome back to Melissa Told Stories, where we untangle the truth. My name is Candace West, and for a decade, I was the woman who kept the system running. I am 44 years old, living in a quiet, tree-lined suburb of St. Louis, Missouri. By day, I work as a supply chain manager for a regional aerospace parts supplier. My entire career is built on identifying stress fractures. I track shipments, audit vendor inventories, and calculate risk. I know that catastrophic failures never happen overnight. They announce themselves through quiet, subtle discrepancies long before the system actually collapses. Oddly enough, my marriage was no different. I just refused to audit it until the numbers stopped making sense. Derek, my husband, is a regional sales director for a commercial brewing equipment manufacturer. He spends his days charming brewery owners, negotiating contracts, and shaking hands. He is a man who thrives on being liked. When we met, I was drawn to that easy charm. I admired how fiercely dedicated he seemed to his daughter Harper, who was only 6 at the time. I spent the next 10 years treating Harper like my own, bending my schedule, managing our finances, and creating a stable home so Derek could chase his sales quotas. I was the pragmatist. He was the dreamer. It worked until it became a cover for theft. To understand how my marriage evaporated in a single text message, we have to rewind exactly 2 weeks before that cruise. It was a Tuesday evening. The air outside held that familiar, damp Midwestern chill. Inside the house smelled of roasted garlic and the lemon cleaner I used on the granite countertops. I sat at the kitchen island, a fresh printout of our Napa Valley itinerary resting under my hands. I had spent months curating this trip. Boutique vineyards, private tasting rooms, a quiet bed and breakfast overlooking the rolling hills. It was supposed to be a celebration of 10 years of loyalty. The front door opened. Derek walked in, loosening his tie, his leather briefcase thudding against the entryway floor. I handed him a glass of wine, expecting him to ask about his flight seat preferences. Instead, he took the glass, set it on the counter without taking a sip, and rubbed the back of his neck. That was his tell. Whenever Derek was about to leverage guilt to get his way, his hand always went straight to his neck. "We need to talk about the anniversary dates," he said. His voice was low, coded in that practiced, gentle tone he used on hesitant clients. I traced the edge of the printed itinerary. "Did your regional manager schedule a conference again?" He shifted his weight, his eyes darting toward the digital clock on the oven, refusing to meet my gaze. "No, it is Harper. She is struggling, Candace. This sophomore year has been brutal on her. She needs a reset. She needs her family." I nodded slowly, keeping my expression neutral. Harper had seemed a little withdrawn lately, but teenagers often are. I assumed he was going to suggest we postpone Napa and take her to the lake for a long weekend. "I booked a cruise," he continued, the words rushing out a little too fast. "A 2-week Caribbean sailing. It overlaps with our Napa dates. I am sorry, but my bonus just cleared and I felt like I had to act fast before the cabin sold out." The math in my head immediately hit a roadblock. Derek despised spending his annual bonus on family vacations. He always earmarked that money for his own hobbies. But I kept my voice steady, waiting for the rest of the equation to present itself. It is just going to be you and Harper, I asked. He swallowed hard. Valerie is coming too. The kitchen grew painfully quiet. The hum of the refrigerator suddenly sounded like a roar. Valerie was his ex-wife. She lived 3 towns over, wore too much perfume, and hated boats. He raised his hands, palms out, playing the exhausted peacemaker. Before you get upset, you have to understand this is a co-parenting crisis. Harper begged for both of us to be there. She needs to see her parents in a healthy dynamic. I know it is awful timing, but I cannot put our anniversary above my daughter's mental health. You are the most understanding woman I know. I need you to understand this. He served the manipulation perfectly. If I argued I was the wicked stepmother denying a struggling teenager her family, if I threw a fit about our anniversary, I was selfish. He had boxed me into a corner, expecting me to shrink and accept it. A younger version of me would have cried. She would have argued until she was blue in the face, demanding respect, only to eventually cave under the weight of his guilt trips. But I did not cry. My aerospace training kicked in. When a vendor tells you a shipment is delayed due to weather, but the radar shows clear skies, you do not argue about the rain. You check their financials. I looked at his face. He was holding his breath, bracing for my tears. I decided to give him something much more dangerous. I gave him my blessing. You know, Derek, I said, my voice smooth and level. You are right. Harper needs you both. Co-parenting is so important. His shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. Relief washed over his features so palpable it was almost sickening. Thank you, Candace. I knew you would get it. I folded the Napa itinerary precisely in half, then in quarters, sliding it into the junk drawer. In fact, I continued, if you are going to be out of the country, focusing on Harper, maybe I should finally take that solo trip to Italy. I have enough miles saved up. I can rent a villa in Tuscany, do an eat, pray, love sort of reset for myself. I watched his eyes. A husband who truly felt guilty about abandoning his wife on their 10th anniversary would have hesitated. He would have felt terrible that we were spending our milestone apart. Derek beamed. That is a brilliant idea, he said, stepping forward to kiss my forehead. You deserve it, Candace. Go find yourself. Go drink wine in Rome. Do not even worry about the house. He walked up the stairs to change out of his suit, whistling a faint tune. I stood frozen at the kitchen island, staring at the empty wineglass he left behind. He was eager. He was entirely too thrilled by the idea of me being distracted out of the country and out of his way. The story he just told me was a fragile, hollow shell. The timeline made no sense. The sudden urgency made no sense. Valerie enduring a 2-week ocean voyage made no sense. I pulled my laptop from my work bag and set it on the granite counter. I did not search for flights to Rome. I opened a private browser window. The rules of logistics are simple. People lie. People manipulate. People use your empathy as a weapon to blind you. But numbers never lie. Money always leaves a trail. I took a slow breath, letting the cold reality settle into my bones. Derek thought he had outsmarted a naive, understanding wife. He forgot he was married to a woman who audits supply chains for a living. I was not going to Italy. I was going to dismantle his entire life. And I was going to start by finding out exactly what he bought, when he bought it, and whose money he really used. I planned everything for our 10th anniversary trip. 2 weeks later, my husband announced he was going on a luxury cruise with his teenage daughter and his ex-wife on that exact day. No explanation. No apology. Then he texted me, "My daughter needs both her parents there. Stop being petty and unblock the joint card. I will pay you back." I smiled and replied. The moment he read my message, his face went pale. Have you ever realized the person you love is building a brand new life using your money? Let me know your age and where you are listening from in the comments below. Welcome back to Melissa Told Stories, where we untangle the truth. My name is Candace West, and for a decade, I was the woman who kept the system running. I am 44 years old, living in a quiet, tree-lined suburb of St. Louis, Missouri. By day, I work as a supply chain manager for a regional aerospace parts supplier. My entire career is built on identifying stress fractures. I track shipments, audit vendor inventories, and calculate risk. I know that catastrophic failures never happen overnight. They announce themselves through quiet, subtle discrepancies long before the system actually collapses. Oddly enough, my marriage was no different. I just refused to audit it until the numbers stopped making sense. Derek, my husband, is a regional sales director for a commercial brewing equipment manufacturer. He spends his days charming brewery owners, negotiating contracts, and shaking hands. He is a man who thrives on being liked. When we met, I was drawn to that easy charm. I admired how fiercely dedicated he seemed to his daughter Harper, who was only 6 at the time. I spent the next 10 years treating Harper like my own, bending my schedule, managing our finances, and creating a stable home so Derek could chase his sales quotas. I was the pragmatist. He was the dreamer. It worked until it became a cover for theft. To understand how my marriage evaporated in a single text message, we have to rewind exactly 2 weeks before that cruise. It was a Tuesday evening. The air outside held that familiar damp Midwestern chill. Inside the house smelled of roasted garlic and the lemon cleaner I used on the granite countertops. I sat at the kitchen island, a fresh printout of our Napa Valley itinerary resting under my hands. I had spent months curating this trip. Boutique vineyards, private tasting rooms, a quiet bed and breakfast overlooking the rolling hills. It was supposed to be a celebration of 10 years of loyalty. The front door opened. Derek walked in, loosening his tie, his leather briefcase thudding against the entryway floor. I handed him a glass of wine, expecting him to ask about his flight seat preferences. Instead, he took the glass, set it on the counter without taking a sip, and rubbed the back of his neck. That was his tell. Whenever Derek was about to leverage guilt to get his way, his hand always went straight to his neck. "We need to talk about the anniversary dates," he said. His voice was low, coded in that practiced, gentle tone he used on hesitant clients. I traced the edge of the printed itinerary. "Did your regional manager schedule a conference again?" He shifted his weight, his eyes darting toward the digital clock on the oven, refusing to meet my gaze. "No, it is Harper. She is struggling, Candace. This sophomore year has been brutal on her. She needs a reset. She needs her family." I nodded slowly, keeping my expression neutral. Harper had seemed a little withdrawn lately, but teenagers often are. I assumed he was going to suggest we postpone Napa and take her to the lake for a long weekend. "I booked a cruise," he continued, the words rushing out a little too fast. "A 2-week Caribbean sailing. It overlaps with our Napa dates. I am sorry, but my bonus just cleared, and I felt like I had to act fast before the cabin sold out." The math in my head immediately hit a roadblock. Derek despised spending his annual bonus on family vacations. He always earmarked that money for his own hobbies. But I kept my voice steady, waiting for the rest of the equation to present itself. "It is just going to be you and Harper?" I asked. He swallowed hard. "Valerie is coming too." The kitchen grew painfully quiet. The hum of the refrigerator suddenly sounded like a roar. Valerie was his ex-wife. She lived 3 towns over, wore too much perfume, and hated boats. He raised his hands, palms out, playing the exhausted peacemaker. "Before you get upset, you have to understand. This is a co-parenting crisis. Harper begged for both of us to be there. She needs to see her parents in a healthy dynamic. I know it is awful timing, but I cannot put our anniversary above my daughter's mental health. You are the most understanding woman I know. I need you to understand this. He served the manipulation perfectly. If I argued I was the wicked stepmother, denying a struggling teenager her family. If I threw a fit about our anniversary, I was selfish. He had boxed me into a corner, expecting me to shrink and accept it. A younger version of me would have cried. She would have argued until she was blue in the face, demanding respect, only to eventually cave under the weight of his guilt trips. But I did not cry. My aerospace training kicked in. When a vendor tells you a shipment is delayed due to weather, but the radar shows clear skies, you do not argue about the rain. You check their financials. I looked at his face. He was holding his breath, bracing for my tears. I decided to give him something much more dangerous. I gave him my blessing. You know, Derek, I said, my voice smooth and level. You are right. Harper needs you both. Co-parenting is so important. His shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. Relief washed over his features, so palpable it was almost sickening. Thank you, Candace. I knew you would get it. I folded the Napa itinerary precisely in half, then in quarters, sliding it into the junk drawer. In fact, I continued, if you are going to be out of the country, focusing on Harper, maybe I should finally take that solo trip to Italy. I have enough miles saved up. I can rent a villa in Tuscany, do an eat, pray, love sort of reset for myself. I watched his eyes. A husband who truly felt guilty about abandoning his wife on their 10th anniversary would have hesitated. He would have felt terrible that we were spending our milestone apart. Derek beamed. That is a brilliant idea, he said, stepping forward to kiss my forehead. You deserve it, Candace. Go find yourself. Go drink wine in Rome. Do not even worry about the house. He walked up the stairs to change out of his suit, whistling a faint tune. I stood frozen at the kitchen island, staring at the empty wine glass he left behind. He was eager. He was entirely too thrilled by the idea of me being distracted out of the country and out of his way. The story he just told me was a fragile, hollow shell. The timeline made no sense. The sudden urgency made no sense. Valerie enduring a 2-week ocean voyage made no sense. I pulled my laptop from my work bag and set it on the granite counter. I did not search for flights to Rome. I opened a private browser window. The rules of logistics are simple. People lie. People manipulate. People use your empathy as a weapon to blind you, but numbers never lie. Money always leaves a trail. I took a slow breath, letting the cold reality settle into my bones. Derek thought he had outsmarted a naive, understanding wife. He forgot he was married to a woman who audits supply chains for a living. I was not going to Italy. I was going to dismantle his entire life. And I was going to start by finding out exactly what he bought when he bought it, and whose money he really used. The next morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen island, right where the Napa Valley itinerary had been sitting hours before. Derek walked into the kitchen, wearing a crisp blue suit, smelling of expensive cedar cologne and fresh confidence. He set a ceramic mug of dark roast coffee next to my laptop. I had the screen angled toward him. A vibrant photograph of a Tuscan vineyard filled the display. You are really doing it, he asked, his voice bright with false support. I kept my eyes on the screen, scrolling slowly through a list of Italian cooking classes. I figured if you are dedicating 2 weeks to repairing your relationship with Harper, I should use that time to recharge. A solo trip to Florence and Tuscany feels right. Derek leaned down and kissed the top of my head. His lips felt cold against my skin. I am proud of you, Candace. This is exactly what you need. Just put whatever you want on the main travel card. We have plenty of miles. I smiled and thanked him, watching as he grabbed his leather briefcase and headed for the garage. The heavy wooden door clicked shut. The engine of his sedan hummed to life and faded down our quiet Missouri street. The second his car was out of earshot, I closed the Tuscany tab. The decoy had worked flawlessly. He felt secure in his victory, believing he had managed a potentially explosive situation with his trademark sales charm. He sold commercial brewing equipment to hard-nosed business owners across the Midwest. He viewed every interaction as a negotiation, and he thought he had just closed the easiest deal of his life. I opened a new encrypted browser window. My fingers moved over the keyboard with practiced rhythm. Aerospace logistics taught me that if you want to find a leak in a system, you do not look at the main pipeline. The main pipeline is always heavily monitored and scrubbed clean. You look at the secondary valves, the forgotten overflow lines. I logged into our joint banking portal. I bypassed the primary checking and the high-yield savings accounts. Derek knew I balanced those ledgers every Friday. He would never risk hiding major expenses in plain sight. Instead, I navigated to a secondary credit account we opened 6 years ago. We called it the Emergency House Card. It had a low limit, a terrible interest rate, and 0 travel rewards. Derek was a man obsessed with status and credit card points. He refused to use this specific card for anything other than a broken water heater or a roof repair. I pulled up the digital statements and began working backward. May was clean. April showed a charge for a plumber. March was empty. February. January. December. My index finger hovered over the trackpad. I opened the November statement. There it was. November 14th. Royal Caribbean International. $4,500. I stared at the black numbers on the bright white screen. The house was dead silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. My pulse did not race. My hands did not shake. Instead, a profound, terrifying stillness settled over me. Derek had stood in my kitchen 12 hours ago and sworn this cruise was a sudden, frantic decision. He claimed he booked it yesterday to handle Harper experiencing a sophomore year mental health crisis. But the numbers stared back at me, proving the deposit was paid 6 months ago. Before the holidays. Before Harper even took her midterm exams. He had been carrying this secret through Thanksgiving, through Christmas, through every dinner we shared, and every conversation about our upcoming 10th anniversary. The betrayal was not a sudden lapse in judgment. It was a calculated, funded operation. My phone vibrated on the granite counter, pulling me from the screen. A text message illuminated the glass. It was Harper. Hey, Candace. Dad said he is working late tonight. Can I swing by after school to grab my summer clothes from the guest room? I need to start packing for this stupid boat trip. I read the message twice. Derek was not working late. He had a vendor dinner downtown. He was creating distance, avoiding the house, so he would not have to look me in the eye while the lie was still fresh. I typed a quick reply. Of course, sweetie. I am making roasted chicken. Stay for dinner. A few hours later, the front door swung open. Harper dropped her heavy canvas backpack in the entryway. She was 16. A girl caught in the messy transition between childhood and young adulthood. She had Derek's dark hair but carried a nervous energy that was entirely her own. I had helped raise her since she was 6 years old, packing her lunches, attending her soccer games, and providing a quiet, stable refuge when her mother Valerie became too demanding. We sat at the dining table, passing plates of chicken and roasted vegetables. Harper pushed a carrot across her plate. Her shoulders slumped. I really do not want to go on this trip, she muttered, stabbing the vegetable with her fork. I kept my tone light and conversational. I thought you loved the ocean, Harper. Plus, it is 2 weeks of sunshine. It will be a nice break from school. She rolled her eyes, letting out a heavy sigh. It is not the ocean. It is the company. Mom has been acting like a total psycho about this cruise for months. She has been planning every single dinner outfit since before Thanksgiving. She even ordered a custom sequin gown back in November, and she keeps making me try on matching dresses. It is suffocating. The piece of chicken I was chewing suddenly tasted like dry sawdust. I swallowed carefully, taking a slow sip of ice water to clear my throat. November, I repeated, keeping my voice pleasant and curious. She bought the dress that long ago. Harper nodded, oblivious to the seismic shift happening across the table. Yeah. Her and Dad have been acting super weird lately, like whispering on the phone when they think I cannot hear them. I rested my hands on my lap beneath the table. My fingernails pressed crescent moons into my palms. I needed her to keep talking without realizing she was being interrogated. I offered a sympathetic smile. Well, parents whispering usually means they are planning a surprise. Maybe they are organizing an excursion for you in the Bahamas. Harper let out a sharp, sarcastic laugh. Doubt it. They are obsessed with Zillow right now. Last weekend, I caught Mom looking at real estate listings on her iPad. It was all these giant log cabins down in the Ozarks. When I asked her about it, she snatched the tablet away and told me to mind my own business. The puzzle pieces snapped together with a force that nearly knocked the wind out of me. A luxury cruise booked 6 months ago. Whispered phone calls. A custom evening gown. Real estate listings for high-end cabins in the rugged Ozark Mountains. This was never about a co-parenting crisis. Derek and Valerie were not taking a family vacation to support their struggling teenager. They were launching a reunion tour. Derek was planning to leave me, and he was using this 2-week Caribbean escape as a victory lap with his ex-wife. I looked at Harper. She was drinking her lemonade, completely unaware that she had just handed me the blueprints to her father's destruction. I felt a pang of deep protective sorrow for her. Derek was using his own daughter as a human shield, a convenient excuse to justify his exit strategy. I smiled at her and offered a second helping of roasted chicken. After dinner, I helped Harper carry her summer clothes out to her car. I hugged her tight, inhaling the scent of her vanilla shampoo, and told her to drive safe. I stood on the driveway, watching her taillights disappear around the corner of our quiet suburban street. The evening air was growing cool. I walked back inside and locked the front door. The silence of the empty house wrapped around me, but it no longer felt lonely. It felt like a staging ground. Derek believed I was a compliant, understanding wife who would gracefully step aside while he financed his new life with Valerie. He assumed I would be busy looking at Italian villas while he finalized whatever real estate transaction they were cooking up in the Ozarks. I walked straight to my home office and woke up my computer. The bank statements were still open on the screen. A cruise was one thing. A luxury cabin in the Ozarks was an entirely different financial beast. Derek did not make enough money on his brewing equipment commissions to afford a second mortgage, especially not one hidden from our primary accounts. If he was buying property, he was pulling capital from somewhere else. I needed to find the escrow account. I needed to find the property deed, and most importantly, I needed to find out whose name he forged to get the money. The glow of my dual monitors illuminated the dark mahogany walls of my home office. On the left screen, a high-definition tour of a rustic stone villa in Tuscany played on a continuous loop. The golden sunlight filtering through Italian grapevines looked like a beautiful painting. It was the perfect visual bait. On the right screen, hidden behind a minimized window, sat the raw data of my 10-year marriage. Derek walked past the open doorway, holding a freshly pressed suit jacket. He paused, leaning against the doorframe, his eyes catching the rolling hills on my monitor. He wore a satisfied, relaxed expression. The tension that usually carried in his shoulders had vanished. He thought he had successfully redirected my attention. He told me to book the best suite available, emphasizing how much I deserved a luxurious reset, while he handled the messy business of co-parenting. I offered him a warm, appreciative smile. I thanked him for his generosity, watching his chest swell with pride. The moment he disappeared down the hallway, the heavy front door shutting behind him, I muted the Italian villa tour. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up our household budget spreadsheets. In the aerospace industry, a supply chain manager does not look for obvious theft. A smart vendor will never steal from the main production line, because that is where the heaviest oversight resides. They siphon resources from secondary systems. They skim from maintenance budgets, obscure packaging fees, or overflow warehousing. I applied the exact same logic to my husband. I reviewed our primary checking and high-yield savings accounts. Everything balanced perfectly. The mortgage payments, the utilities, the car notes, the grocery expenditures. The numbers aligned with pristine accuracy. Derek knew I reconciled these ledgers on the first of every month. He was a salesman, accustomed to managing quotas and expense reports. He was too disciplined to leave a trace in our daily transaction logs. I leaned back in my leather chair, letting the quiet of the empty house surround me. I closed my eyes and visualized our financial architecture. There was one account I rarely checked. 6 years ago, a severe hailstorm tore through our Missouri suburb, damaging the roof. We opened a secondary joint credit card through a local credit union, specifically to handle the insurance deductible and contractor fees. It carried a frustratingly low credit limit, a high interest rate, and offered 0 travel rewards. Derek openly despised that card. He was the type of man who meticulously tracked airline miles and hotel points, viewing premium credit cards as status symbols. He had sworn never to use the credit union card again, tossing it into the back of his desk drawer. It was the perfect blind spot. I navigated to the credit union portal. My heart beat in a steady, measured rhythm. I typed in my credentials and waited for the dashboard to load. The blue loading circle spun, mocking the sudden dryness in my throat. When the interface populated, I clicked on the transaction history. I set the filter to display the past 12 months. October was clean. September showed nothing. August and July were empty. I scrolled down my index finger, dragging against the mouse wheel. November. The text rendered in stark black ink against the white background. November 14th. Royal Caribbean Luxury Excursions, $4,500. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. The date seared itself into my memory. November 14th was 6 months ago. It was before Thanksgiving. It was before Harper even finished her fall semester. Derek had stood in my kitchen just yesterday, his voice heavy with manufactured stress, claiming this cruise was a sudden, desperate measure to cure his daughter's recent sophomore slump. He had spun a masterful tale about a last-minute booking, leveraging a fresh annual bonus to secure the final remaining cabins. The timeline laid out before me proved every single word was a calculated fabrication. The co-parenting crisis was a premeditated lie, financed through an emergency card he thought I had forgotten. He had been carrying this secret through the holidays, through family dinners, through every conversation we shared about our upcoming Napa Valley anniversary. The betrayal was not a fleeting moment of weakness. It was a heavily funded strategic operation. My cell phone buzzed against the wooden desk, jarring me from the screen. A text message illuminated the glass. It was Harper. "Hey, Candace. Can I come over this afternoon to grab my summer clothes from the guest bedroom closet? I need to start figuring out what to pack for this boat trip." I read the message twice, composing my thoughts. Harper was 16, navigating that fragile bridge between adolescence and adulthood. I had helped raise her since she was a little girl, in pigtails packing her lunches, driving her to soccer practice, and providing a quiet refuge when her biological mother became too overwhelming. Valerie was notorious for her dramatic mood swings and demanding nature. I loved Harper fiercely, and the thought of her being used as a pawn in her parents' scheme ignited a cold, hard resolve in my chest. I typed a quick reply. "Of course. I will make a batch of those chocolate chip cookies you like. See you soon." An hour later, the front door swung open. Harper dropped her heavy canvas backpack on the entryway rug, letting out a drawn-out, exhausted sigh. She had Derek's dark hair, but carried a nervous energy that belonged entirely to her. I handed her a warm cookie on a paper towel and leaned against the kitchen island, keeping my posture relaxed and inviting. So I started my voice light and conversational. A Caribbean cruise sounds like an amazing way to kick off the summer. You must be getting excited. Harper took a bite of her cookie and rolled her eyes, offering the teenager equivalent of a heavy groan. It is going to be terrible. I do not even want to go. I tilted my head, offering a sympathetic smile. Why not? 2 weeks of sunshine and unlimited soft-serve ice cream sounds like a pretty good deal to me. She shook her head, scattering a few crumbs on the granite counter. It is not the boat. It is Mom. She has been acting like a total stress case about this trip for months. It is all she talks about. She is treating it like some weird red carpet event instead of a family vacation. I kept my expression neutral, though the air in my lungs suddenly felt thin. Oh, does she have a lot of fancy dinners planned? Harper scoffed, leaning her elbows on the counter. Fancy is an understatement. She has been forcing me to look at matching resort outfits since before Thanksgiving. She even drove up to Chicago in November to buy a custom beaded evening gown specifically for the captain's formal dinner. Who buys a dress 6 months early for a cruise? The words hung in the air, heavy and damning. November. The exact same month, Derek charged $4,500 to our emergency credit card. My analytical mind locked the pieces together with terrifying precision. A luxury vacation booked half a year in advance. A custom evening gown purchased in another state. Derek faking a sudden mental health crisis for his daughter to justify the timing. This was not a co-parenting effort. They were not taking a family vacation to support their struggling teenager. They were launching a grand reunion tour. Derek and Valerie were planning to rekindle their relationship on the open ocean, wearing formal attire, all while I was supposed to be sitting in a rented Italian villa, distracted and out of the way. He was using my financial stability, my organized household, and my inherent trust to fund his new life. I looked at Harper, her youthful face clouded with genuine frustration. She had no idea she had just handed me the final blueprint to her father's deception. I felt a sharp pang of sorrow for her. Derek was using his own child as a human shield, a convenient excuse to justify his exit strategy. I reached across the island and squeezed her shoulder gently. Well, just try to enjoy the sunshine. You can always hide by the pool if the formal dinners get too intense. She offered a small, grateful smile and headed down the hallway to pack her clothes. I stood alone in the kitchen, the remnants of the warm cookies resting on the counter. The sorrow I felt for Harper quickly hardened into a precise, tactical focus. A cruise was an expensive endeavor, but it was only a vacation. If Derek was truly planning to leave me and build a new life with Valerie, they would need more than a boat trip. They would need a foundation, a home. I needed more data. I needed to see the raw, unfiltered statements from Derek's personal checking accounts. I needed to trace every single dollar he had earned and spent over the last year. But there was a significant obstacle standing in my way. Derek's accounts were secured by two-factor authentication tied directly to his mobile phone. If I tried to log in from my computer, he would receive a push notification instantly alerting him to the breach. I walked back to my home office and stared at my dual monitors. To dismantle his operation, I had to execute a digital heist right under his nose without triggering a single alarm. In the aerospace supply chain industry, you learn early on that every secure system has a backdoor. Engineers build redundancies into flight software, not to encourage breaches, but to ensure recovery when a primary interface fails. Security is an illusion, relying entirely on the user following the designated path. When you step off that path, the architecture becomes remarkably fragile. Derek's financial architecture was built on convenience, shielded by a false sense of technological superiority. Years ago, he kept locking himself out of the vendor portals he used for his commercial brewing equipment sales. He would call me during his lunch breaks, frustrated, asking me to reset his credentials. Eventually, I consolidated his digital life into a unified password manager. I knew his master phrase. It was a predictable combination of Harper's birth year and the name of a childhood pet. But knowing the password was merely the first step. The true barrier was the two-factor authentication protocol. If I attempted to log into his personal checking account from my desktop, the banking algorithm would flag the unrecognized IP address. A security text containing a 6-digit verification code would ping his mobile device. Derek was currently sitting at a high-end steakhouse downtown, entertaining a prospective brewery client. His phone would be resting face up on the white linen tablecloth. A sudden fraud alert lighting up his screen would ruin the entire operation. I had to intercept the alert before it ever reached his device. I opened a secure, untraceable browser and generated a temporary burner email address. Next, I navigated to the administrative dashboard of our shared cellular provider. Because I managed the household logistics, the master account rested in my name. My fingers moved across the keyboard with a steady, practiced rhythm. I accessed the developer tools, bypassing the standard user interface to reach the network routing commands. I initiated a conditional text forwarding rule. Instead of sending incoming SMS data directly to his hardware, the network would mirror the texts to my burner inbox. I buried the command deep in the settings to ensure no notification banner would pop up on his end. With the digital mirror active, I opened a new tab and navigated to his bank's login page. I typed his credentials. I pressed enter. The screen shifted, demanding the security code sent to his registered mobile number. I switched back to the burner inbox. The silence in the room stretched heavy and thick. 5 seconds passed. 10 seconds. If the cellular bypass failed, Derek was reading a security warning right now. My chest tightened, a cold pressure building beneath my ribs. Then a bold line of text populated the inbox. Your verification code is 72491. I typed the numbers and shattered the firewall. His financial dashboard loaded, displaying his checking, savings, and hidden personal credit lines. I did not waste time browsing the visual interface. I navigated directly to the statement generation tool, requesting raw PDF downloads for the preceding 24 months. The files compiled, dropping silently into an encrypted folder on my hard drive. While the server processed the bulk download, I opened his transaction ledger and applied a filter for outgoing wire transfers. The ledger revealed a rhythmic, systemic bleed. Derek earned substantial quarterly commissions whenever he closed a brewing equipment contract. For years, I had structured our household budget to run entirely on my aerospace salary, allowing his commissions to build our savings and fund Harper's future college tuition. Instead, the ledger showed that every month, shortly after his bonus checks cleared, thousands of dollars vanished. The destination was labeled under a generic real estate holding trust. I opened a public records database and cross-referenced the holding trust. The registered address traced back to a commercial title company operating out of southern Missouri, nestled deep in the rugged Ozark Mountains. My suspicions, sparked by Harper's casual complaint about real estate listings, crystallized into undeniable fact. Derek was funneling marital assets into an escrow account for a luxury cabin. He was buying a house with his ex-wife, using the financial stability I provided to underwrite the mortgage. I was so focused on mapping the dates of the wire transfers that I failed to hear the garage door open. Our house featured a thick, insulated firewall between the garage and the interior hallway, a structural upgrade I insisted upon during our renovation. The first sound that actually registered was the heavy, rhythmic thud of Derek's leather dress shoes walking across the hardwood floor. He was home early from his client dinner. Adrenaline spiked, flooding my veins, but my physical movements remained calculated and precise. I had roughly 3 seconds before he reached the threshold of my office. I executed a keyboard shortcut, minimizing the banking portal and hiding the encrypted file folder. I pulled the Tuscan Vineyard tour back to the primary display, maximizing the high-definition video, just as Derek's shadow fell across my desk. He leaned against the door frame, loosening his silk tie. The rich scent of roasted steak and expensive bourbon drifted into the room, cutting through the sterile air of the office. He looked relaxed, his posture loose, radiating the quiet arrogance of a man who believed he held all the cards. I kept my eyes fixed on the rolling Italian hills, letting my shoulders drop into a casual, unbothered stance. "You are home early," I said, keeping my tone light and conversational. "The client signed the contract faster than anticipated," he replied, walking up behind my leather chair. He rested his hands on my shoulders. His fingers felt heavy, an unearned intimacy that made my skin crawl. "Still looking at Italy. I am trying to decide between Florence and Siena," I murmured, clicking through a photo gallery featuring a rustic stone patio overlooking a vineyard. "Siena seems quieter. It might be better for a reset while you and Harper are on the water." He squeezed my shoulders, a gesture intended to convey affection, but steeped in manipulation. "You deserve the best, Candace. Book the villa in Siena, drink the good wine, have a great time in Rome. I want you to come back refreshed." He kissed the top of my head and turned away, heading down the hallway toward the master bedroom to change out of his suit. I listened to his fading footsteps, staring at the vibrant green grapes on my monitor. He thought he was patronizing a naive wife, sending her across the ocean on a fabricated journey of self-discovery so he could finalize his secret life in the Ozarks. He had no idea that beneath the beautiful pictures of Italian scenery lay the downloaded architecture of his financial ruin. I now possessed the digital keys to his destruction, and he had smiled while I held them. But tracing the money to an escrow account was only a fraction of the equation. To close on a luxury property in the Ozarks, a simple cash down payment would not suffice. The banks would require substantial collateral, a hard asset to secure the mortgage. Derek did not own any property outright. Our suburban home carried a joint mortgage, which he could not leverage without my physical presence and notarized consent. As I opened the final PDF statement from his downloaded files, my eyes locked onto a processing fee paid to a remote online notary service. A cold realization washed over me. He had not just siphoned our cash. He had offered the bank something much larger, something that did not belong to him. The cursor hovered over a seemingly insignificant line item on the downloaded bank statement. It was a processing fee paid to a remote online notary service based in a different state. In the aerospace supply chain industry, out-of-state verification fees usually indicate a vendor attempting to bypass local compliance inspections. In a marriage, it indicates a spouse signing legal documents they want to keep hidden. Derek had siphoned thousands of dollars into a holding trust. A quick search through the Missouri property tax database revealed the trust was an escrow for a sprawling luxury cabin located deep in the Ozark Mountains. The listing photos showed towering glass windows, vaulted timber ceilings, and a private boat dock extending into crystal clear water. It was a magnificent property, priced well beyond the boundaries of a regional sales director's salary. My analytical training took over, silencing any residual emotional shock. I calculated the purchase price against the drained cash from our accounts. The math failed immediately. Derek's hidden funds could barely cover 20% of the required down payment. The gap was monumental. Traditional lenders do not finance luxury vacation homes for buyers lacking substantial capital, unless the buyer provides a flawless, unencumbered asset as collateral. Derek did not own any significant assets. The suburban home we lived in carried a joint mortgage. His retirement accounts were modest. The only unencumbered, highly valuable asset in our family portfolio belonged entirely to me. When my father passed away, he left me 300 acres of fertile, rolling plains in northern Missouri. That land was my anchor. It represented my family heritage, the calloused hands of my grandfather, and my ultimate financial independence. I did not sell the acreage. Instead, I leased the property to a massive commercial brewing cooperative. Ironically, that same brewing cooperative purchased their industrial fermentation tanks from Derek's employer. My land practically subsidized his industry. Derek always viewed the farm with quiet disdain, calling it idle dirt that should be liquidated and invested in the stock market. I always refused, ensuring the deed remained exclusively in my name, protected by an airtight premarital trust. A chilling realization crept up my spine, freezing the breath in my lungs. I opened a new browser tab and accessed the Northern Missouri County Clerk's Public Records portal. My fingers felt stiff, resisting the commands my brain was sending. I typed my maiden name into the property search bar and pressed enter. The database generated a list of historical filings related to my farm. At the very top of the list, registered just 3 weeks ago, was a fresh commercial lien. My heart stopped beating for one agonizing second. Then it resumed with a heavy, rhythmic thud that echoed in my ears. Derek had leveraged my father's farm. He had used my family legacy as collateral to secure the financing for his Ozark love nest with Valerie. I clicked on the filing, downloading the scanned PDF of the recorded deed of trust. I needed to understand the mechanics of his theft. Securing a collateral loan against a protected trust requires more than a simple digital signature. Title companies are rigorous. Lenders demand ironclad verification. To encumber my property, Derek would have needed my physical presence, a government-issued identification card, and a licensed notary public to witness my signature. I scrolled through the dense legal jargon of the loan packet until I reached the final appendix. There, attached as supporting documentation, was a power of attorney. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes scanning the grainy text. I recognized the document, but the context was entirely wrong. 3 years ago, I was stranded in Seattle, dealing with a catastrophic titanium supply chain failure. Tax season was ending, and Derek needed to file our joint returns. I signed a highly specific limited power of attorney, allowing him to sign the tax documents on my behalf. The document attached to the Ozark collateral loan was heavily altered. The date had been manipulated. The limited scope regarding our tax returns had been digitally erased and replaced with broad, sweeping language granting Derek full authority over my real estate assets. But the most damning piece of evidence was the notary seal stamped at the bottom of the page. It belonged to the out-of-state remote online notary service I found on his bank statement. Derek had not just altered the document. He had bribed a negligent online notary, or perhaps used a fabricated identity card on a digital webcam call to officially verify the forged signature. The air in my office suddenly felt incredibly thin. This was no longer a civil dispute over a failing marriage. This was not a story about a husband experiencing a midlife crisis seeking comfort in the arms of his ex-wife. This was felony financial fraud. Derek had crossed a line that fundamentally altered the trajectory of our impending separation. He had forged legal documents to steal my heritage. He assumed I was too trusting, too busy with my corporate logistics, and too blindly devoted to ever check the county clerk records of my own property. He thought he could quietly siphon the equity out of my farm, close on the cabin, while I was supposedly drinking wine in Italy, and then present the divorce as a simple, amicable split. The sheer audacity of his plan burned away the last lingering remnants of my grief. You mourn the loss of a partner. You do not mourn the loss of a parasite. I sat back in my leather chair, staring at the fraudulent notary seal. My objective shifted entirely. Divorce is a negotiation. You divide the savings accounts, you argue over who keeps the leather sofa, you mediate the sale of the primary residence. Felony fraud is an execution. I no longer wanted to separate from Derek. I wanted to completely dismantle him. I wanted to orchestrate a collapse so profound and so publicly devastating that he would never recover. I wanted to strip away his charming salesman facade and expose the criminal hiding underneath. I minimized the county records and created a secure, encrypted folder on my hard drive. I meticulously saved the altered power of attorney, the remote notary processing receipt, the wire transfers to the Ozark Holding Trust, and the luxury cruise payments. I organized the files with the same ruthless efficiency I used to terminate fraudulent aerospace vendors. Every document was a nail in his eventual coffin. But holding the evidence was only the first phase of the operation. Deploying it prematurely would be a tactical error. If I confronted Derek tonight while he was changing out of his suit in our bedroom, he would panic. He would hire a defense attorney, beg for a plea deal, and attempt to untangle the collateral loan before the bank caught wind of the forgery. He would find a way to mitigate the damage. I could not allow him to mitigate anything. I needed him to proceed with his plan. I needed him to walk blindly into the trap, believing he had achieved total victory. I needed the Ozark escrow to reach the absolute final stage of funding. To execute a strike this precise, I needed a legal architect. I did not need a mediator who specialized in amicable splits and therapeutic co-parenting arrangements. I needed a litigator who understood the raw, punitive power of the American judicial system. I needed someone who could wield a financial injunction like a scalpel. I pulled out my phone and opened my contacts. I scrolled past the couple's therapists and the friendly neighborhood mediators. I searched for the name of a woman I met years ago during a corporate compliance seminar in downtown St. Louis. She was a family law attorney known for her terrifying courtroom presence and her absolute refusal to settle when her clients held the winning hand. I typed a brief, calculated message requesting an emergency consultation. I attached no details, only stating that I had uncovered a massive real estate forgery involving marital assets. I set the phone face down on the desk. The glow of the monitors illuminated the dark room. Derek was just down the hallway brushing his teeth, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire future was currently sitting in an encrypted folder on my hard drive. He thought he was preparing for a Caribbean vacation. He did not realize I was already planning his funeral. The screen of my phone lit up, vibrating against the wood. The attorney had replied instantly. My appointment was set for tomorrow morning. I took a deep breath, preparing to play the role of the oblivious wife for one more night. Downtown St. Louis is a monument to industrial resilience. The Gateway Arch frames the skyline, a towering curve of steel, standing defiant against the muddy currents of the Mississippi River. I parked my sedan in a subterranean garage beneath a sleek glass high-rise. My leather tote bag rested on the passenger seat, holding a manila folder thick with printed bank statements, the forged power of attorney, and the remote notary logs. I stepped onto the concrete floor, my heels echoing in the cavernous space. I was not walking into a mediation. I was walking into a war room. The law offices of Pierce & Associates occupied the 34th floor. The reception area smelled of expensive lemon polish and fresh espresso. I did not wait long. Joanna Pierce emerged from a set of double oak doors. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer and possessed the sharp, unblinking gaze of a predator who rarely lost her prey. I met her years ago during a corporate compliance seminar. noting how she dismantled an opposing speaker with terrifying politeness. I needed that exact surgical ruthlessness today. We sat at a broad mahogany conference table. Joanna poured 2 glasses of sparkling water, sliding one across the polished wood toward me. She opened the manila folder. The room fell utterly silent save for the crisp turning of paper. I watched her eyes track the highlighted wire transfers jumping from the drained joint savings account to the Ozark Holding Trust. Then she reached the final document, the deed of trust bearing the altered, fraudulently notarized signature. Joanna paused. She read the remote online notary receipt once, then a second time. She set the pages down and intertwined her fingers, leaning forward. When spouses hide money, it is usually a mundane game of offshore accounts or secret credit lines, she said, her voice a low, steady hum. But forging a signature on a premarital agricultural trust to secure a luxury real estate loan is breathtakingly arrogant. This transcends civil dispute, Candace. Your husband has committed a felony. If we present this to a judge, Derek is facing severe financial restitution and likely criminal prosecution. I took a slow sip of the sparkling water. The carbonation burned the back of my throat, grounding me. I do not want him to just face restitution, Joanna. I want to amputate him from my life so cleanly that he never recovers the balance. A faint, dangerous smile touched the corners of her mouth. She pulled a yellow legal pad from her briefcase and began drafting the counteroffensive. Our first move is a quiet title action, she explained, the pen scratching rapidly across the lined paper. By filing this with the county clerk in northern Missouri, we immediately cloud the title on your agricultural land. It signals to the lender that the collateral is contested. The bank will instantly freeze the underwriting process for his Ozark cabin. Simultaneously, I will draft an emergency ex parte financial injunction. A judge will sign it based on the evidence of fraud. That injunction will sever Derek's access to every joint account, credit line, and shared asset you possess. She tapped the cap of her pen against the mahogany table. I can have the process server deliver the injunction to his office by 3 o'clock this afternoon. We can shut off his oxygen before he leaves for his commute home. I stared at the yellow legal pad. In aerospace logistics, executing a recall too early often allows the vendor to hide their remaining defective inventory. You never pull the alarm while the target is standing near the exit. You wait until they are locked inside the containment zone. No, I replied, my voice cool and measured. We do not serve him today. Joanna raised a skeptical eyebrow. Every day you wait is a day he could theoretically pull more cash. He will not, I countered. I audited his communications with the title company. The final balloon payment for the Ozark cabin escrow is due precisely in 14 days. That deadline aligns exactly with the morning he boards his luxury cruise in Miami. Right now, Derek thinks he has orchestrated a flawless victory. If we strike today, he will panic. He will hire defense counsel, beg for a plea deal, and try to cancel the cabin purchase before the bank initiates a fraud investigation. He will find a way to spin a narrative of a misunderstanding. I refuse to give him the opportunity to control the fallout. I leaned across the table, meeting her sharp gaze. We wait. We let him pack his bags. We let him fly to Florida with his ex-wife. We let him walk up to the VIP check-in desk believing his new life is fully funded. We file the quiet title action and activate the financial injunction on the exact morning his ship departs. Joanna studied my face for a long, silent moment. She recognized the strategy. It was not born of spite. It was pure, unadulterated system failure engineering. The smile returned to her face wider this time. You want him to realize he is drowning while he is surrounded by the ocean, she murmured. I stood up, smoothing the fabric of my pencil skirt. I want him to understand the exact cost of using my soil to build his foundation. The drive back to the suburbs felt entirely different than the morning commute. The oppressive weight of uncertainty had evaporated, replaced by the cold, clear oxygen of purpose. I pulled my sedan into the driveway, the tires crunching softly against the pavement. The house stood quiet and immaculate, a domestic stage waiting for its final performance. I walked into the kitchen, tied an apron around my waist, and began preparing dinner. I moved with practiced efficiency. I minced cloves of fresh garlic, the sharp scent rising into the air. I seasoned a thick flank steak with crushed black peppercorns and sea salt, dropping it into a smoking cast iron skillet. The meat hissed a violent, satisfying sound. I chopped fresh rosemary, tossed root vegetables in olive oil, and set the dining room table with our heavy ceramic plates. I was preparing a nourishing, hearty meal for a man who was actively trying to ruin me. The irony added a rich, dark flavor to the evening. The garage door rumbled open just as I pulled the roasted vegetables from the oven. Derek walked into the kitchen, shedding his suit jacket and loosening his tie. He inhaled deeply, his eyes lighting up with genuine appreciation. "It smells incredible in here," he said, stepping up behind me to press a quick, obligatory kiss to my cheek. I smiled, turning to hand him a glass of Cabernet. "I figured you could use a good home-cooked meal. I know you have been stressed about Harper, and prepping for this trip must be exhausting." He took a generous sip of the wine, nodding solemnly. "It is a lot to carry. Dealing with Valerie's constant demands regarding the itinerary is draining, but it is a sacrifice I have to make for my daughter. I just appreciate you being so understanding about the Italian villa idea. Have you picked a region yet?" I carried the sliced steak to the dining table. "I am leaning toward Tuscany," I lied smoothly. "I found a beautiful stone house surrounded by vineyards. It seems like the perfect place to disconnect from everything." We sat across from each other, passing serving dishes in a pantomime of a healthy, functioning marriage. Derek carved his meat, talking enthusiastically about a brewing equipment contract he hoped to close next quarter. I nodded at the appropriate intervals, offering supportive murmurs, studying the contours of his face. He looked so comfortable. He possessed the dangerous ease of a man who believed the ground beneath his feet was solid rock. He had no idea he was standing on a trapdoor, and I was holding the lever. As I cleared the empty plates, the dynamic in the room subtly shifted. Derek did not follow me into the kitchen to help wash the dishes, a chore he usually performed to maintain his image of the helpful husband. Instead, he remained seated at the dining table, staring at his mobile phone. The relaxed posture he carried in from the garage slowly stiffened. He set the device face down on the wood. His right hand reached up, fingers rubbing the back of his neck. It was his tell, the physical manifestation of incoming manipulation. I turned on the faucet, letting the warm water run over my hands, waiting for the performance to begin. "Candace," he called out, his voice dropping into that familiar, soothing register he reserved for delivering bad news. "Do you have a minute? I need to talk to you about a slight logistical problem." I dried my hands on a linen towel and walked back to the doorway. "Is everything all right with the cruise?" He sighed, heavily massaging his temples. "The cruise is fine. It is my car. The transmission has been acting up for weeks, and my mechanic just sent me the diagnostic report. It is failing. If I do not replace the entire block before I leave for Miami, the dealership warned me the engine could seize up while it sits idle in long-term parking." I watched his eyes. The lie was smooth, rehearsed, and utterly transparent. I already knew the Ozark escrow was short. I already knew he was desperate for a final injection of cash to close the cabin deal. He was about to ask me to fund the very weapon he planned to use against me. I kept my hands resting gently on the edge of the porcelain sink, letting the warm water drain away. I turned to face him, leaning against the counter. A transmission I repeated, letting the word hang in the quiet dining room. Derek drove a pristine German sedan. He treated that vehicle with a level of reverence he rarely extended to human beings. He washed it every Sunday morning, boasting about its superior engineering to his brewery clients. For him to claim a sudden, catastrophic mechanical failure on a well-maintained car was a desperate pivot. He needed a cover story, and he needed one that justified a significant, immediate expense. He nodded, running a hand through his hair to simulate exhaustion. Yes, the gears have been slipping for a week. I took it into the shop this afternoon, and the mechanic ran a full diagnostic. The transmission block is failing. It is a severe safety hazard, Candace. If I do not replace the entire system before I leave for Miami, the dealership warned me the engine could seize up while it sits idle in the airport parking garage. I watched his chest rise and fall. He was breathing just a fraction too fast. How much is the replacement? I asked, keeping my voice laced with mild wifely concern. He looked down at his phone, pretending to review a digital invoice. The shop quoted me $8,500. It covers the imported parts and the specialized labor. $8,500. The exact figure echoed in my mind. It was a precise, undeniable number. Through my digital audit of his hidden accounts, I already mapped the remaining balance required for the Ozark cabin. $8,500 was the exact shortage he needed to close the real estate escrow. He was not asking for car repairs. He was asking me to purchase the front porch of his new love nest. He wanted me to underwrite the final stage of his betrayal. I infused my expression with deep sympathy. Derek, that is terrible timing. But you cannot risk driving a dangerous vehicle. You have to get it fixed right away, especially with your upcoming flight. He exhaled a long breath, stepping closer, thinking he had hooked his target. Exactly. You understand. The problem is my commission check from the brewing equipment sale does not clear until the end of the month. I hate to ask this, but could you transfer the funds from your personal savings into our joint checking? I will pay you back the second my bonus lands. I just need to cover this emergency so I can focus on Harper and this trip. He served the extortion attempt wrapped in the guise of paternal duty. If I said no, I was endangering his safety and adding stress to his fragile co-parenting dynamic. He expected me to pull out my phone and authorize the transfer without a second thought. I smiled a soft, reassuring expression. Of course I can help, Derek. You know we are a team. The tension melted from his shoulders. His posture relaxed. Thank you, Candace. You are a lifesaver. I will pull up the routing number for the joint account. Transferring cash is terribly inefficient, I said, interrupting his victory lap. You know how meticulous I am with our household accounting. Moving that much money between personal and joint ledgers creates unnecessary tax complications. I will just write a physical check directly to the repair shop. Derek froze. His hand hovered over his phone. The color began to drain from his cheeks. A physical check. Yes, I continued, my tone bright and helpful. It makes tracking our deductions much easier. I have my checkbook right here in my work bag. What is the name of the garage? His eyes darted toward the hallway, a visual manifestation of a trapped animal seeking an exit. They do not take checks, Candace. It is a modern shop. They only accept digital payments or direct account transfers. I tilted my head, adopting a look of mild confusion. Every legitimate automotive business accepts certified checks. I am an aerospace supply chain manager, Derek. I deal with specialized vendors every day. Nobody turns down guaranteed paper currency. I will call my credit union first thing in the morning, have them cut a certified cashier check, and I can drop it off on my way to the office. He swallowed hard. A faint sheen of sweat appeared on his forehead. You do not have time to drive all the way out there. The shop is located deep in the county. Besides, they need a wire transfer tonight to initiate the parts order from Germany. If they do not get the wire tonight, the transmission will not arrive in time for my flight. I maintained steady eye contact, cornering him with flawless logic. Aerospace parts shipped from Germany take at least 3 weeks to clear international customs. A commercial transmission will not arrive by tomorrow morning, no matter how fast you wire the funds. Tell the mechanic we will pay the invoice in person when you drop the car off. I will ride with you. I can hand the manager the check myself, and then I will drive you home. His jaw clenched. The smooth, charming salesman facade began to crack, revealing the panicked fraudster underneath. He was attempting to navigate a maze, and I was systematically bricking up every single exit. He could not provide a mechanic name. He could not provide an invoice. He could not accept a physical check because the money was intended for a title company in southern Missouri. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, his voice rising in sudden frustration. "You are making this far more complicated than it needs to be. I am just trying to fix my car before I take my daughter on a trip." I did not flinch. I kept my voice perfectly calm, a stark contrast to his rising panic. "I am just trying to maintain our financial records, Derek. A direct payment is the most secure method." He waved his hand in the air, a sharp, dismissive gesture. He realized he could not outwit a woman who spent her life auditing logistical discrepancies. He was losing the negotiation, and he knew it. "Forget it," he muttered, turning his back to me. "I will just pull a hardship loan from my retirement portfolio. It will carry a heavy tax penalty, but I will manage. I do not want you stressing over my vehicle problems right before your vacation." I watched him storm out of the dining room and march up the stairs. The heavy tread of his footsteps echoed through the house, followed by the firm slam of the bedroom door. I stood alone in the kitchen, the silence rushing back in to fill the space. I had forced him to abandon his primary extraction plan. By insisting on a simple, traceable payment method, I dismantled his leverage without ever raising my voice or revealing my true hand. He retreated, believing I was just a rigid, overly organized accountant. He had no idea I was an executioner. I walked into my home office and woke up my computer. I opened the encrypted folder containing the evidence for Joanna. I created a new text document and drafted a meticulous note detailing his extortion attempt. I recorded the exact time of the conversation, the precise dollar amount he requested, and the fabricated narrative about the failing transmission. Documenting his desperation added another layer of premeditation to his upcoming fraud trial. I closed the laptop and looked out the window. The suburban streetlights cast long, dark shadows across the manicured lawns. Derek had failed to secure the final escrow payment from my savings. Pulling a hardship loan from a retirement account requires layers of corporate approval, a process that takes weeks, not days. He was out of time, and he was out of capital. The Ozark closing was now officially in jeopardy. This failure would create a ripple effect. Derek was attempting to build a secret kingdom, but he was building it with a partner who demanded immediate results. Valerie despised waiting. Her patience was a brittle, fragile thing, easily shattered by inconvenience. If Derek could not deliver the required funds to the title company, he would have to make excuses to his ex-wife. Valerie would not sit quietly in the shadows and accept a delay. She was a woman driven by ego and entitlement. When she felt her prize slipping away, she would not rely on Derek to fix it. She would step into the light. She would try to assert her dominance, and in doing so, she would make a fatal mistake. My corner office at the aerospace logistics facility is a sanctuary of absolute precision. The space features floor-to-ceiling glass windows overlooking the primary manufacturing floor, where massive titanium components are assembled for commercial flight. The environment requires rigorous control, strict security clearances, and zero tolerance for chaos. Industrial machinery hums constantly through the insulated walls. a steady frequency that helps me focus. I thrive in this pristine, highly regulated atmosphere. It is the exact opposite of the messy, unpredictable, emotional theater my husband was currently attempting to stage at our house. I was reviewing a delayed freight manifest on my dual monitors when the intercom on my polished oak desk buzzed. The voice of my administrative assistant crackled through the speaker, sounding unusually hesitant. She informed me that a woman claiming a family emergency had bypassed the front lobby security protocols by using my teenage stepdaughter as an excuse. Before I could instruct my assistant to call building security, the heavy glass door to my office swung open. Valerie stepped across the threshold. She stood in the center of my corporate sanctuary, looking wildly out of place. Derek's ex-wife was a woman who navigated life relying entirely on volume and visual distraction. She wore a bright crimson silk blouse paired with oversized designer sunglasses pushed up into her bleached blonde hair. The overwhelming scent of heavy floral perfume immediately invaded the climate-controlled air, masking the usual sterile smell of ionized machinery. A heavy gold chain rested against her collarbone, catching the fluorescent overhead lights. She carried a single crumpled piece of paper in her manicured hand. I did not stand up. I did not offer her a chair. I merely folded my hands over the freight manifest and waited, letting the silence stretch until it became a physical weight in the room. In negotiations, the person who speaks first surrenders their leverage. Valerie shifted her weight, the sharp heel of her designer shoe clicking against the polished concrete floor. She lowered the piece of paper onto the edge of my desk, tapping it with a long acrylic fingernail. Harper needs this medical release form signed for her summer field hockey camp, Valerie announced, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Derek mentioned you handle all her school administration, so I figured I would just drop it off in person. I hope I am not interrupting anything too complicated. She cast a dismissive glance around my office, her eyes sweeping over the complex supply chain schematics pinned to the whiteboard. She was attempting a power play. A permission slip could easily be emailed, mailed, or handed over during a standard custody transition. Driving all the way to a secured industrial park in the middle of a Thursday afternoon was a blatant territory marking exercise. Derek had failed to secure the final $8,500 for their escrow account the previous night. I knew his failure had caused a ripple of panic. Valerie was impatient. She thrived on instant gratification. When Derek could not produce the cash for her new luxury cabin, her ego demanded that she insert herself into the equation. She needed to stand in my territory and feel superior to the woman whose bank accounts she was currently trying to drain. I glanced at the crumpled paper, then back up to her face. My expression remained entirely vacant of emotion. You drove 40 miles across the county to deliver a non-urgent athletic waiver. I noted, my tone perfectly flat. Your dedication to administrative tasks is truly surprising, Valerie. Her jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, the artificial smile straining at the edges. She recovered quickly, leaning one hip against the edge of my visitor chair. Well, we are just trying to get all our ducks in a row before the big trip. Derek and I have so much planning to do. Coordinating a 2-week ocean voyage with a teenager is exhausting, but I suppose you would not understand that since you are running away to Europe. The bait was dangling right in front of me. She wanted a reaction. She wanted me to snap, to display jealousy, to give her the satisfaction of knowing she had stolen my husband and ruined my 10th anniversary. Instead, a profound wave of cold satisfaction washed over my chest. The red herring had worked flawlessly. Derek had run straight to Valerie and bragged about my fabricated Italian vacation. They both genuinely believed I was packing my bags for a solitary retreat in Tuscany, completely oblivious to their impending real estate transaction. I offered her a polite, icy smile. Italy offers a wonderful environment for reflection. I am looking forward to the solitude. It gives everyone the exact amount of space they require. Valerie let out a short, condescending laugh. It is just very eat, pray, love of you, Candace. A little cliche, but I guess a midlife crisis hits everyone differently. Derek was so relieved when you agreed to stay behind. He really needs this time to focus on building a solid foundation for our family. Harper needs nature. She needs to be around water. In fact, Derek and I are thinking about spending a lot more time down south this summer. The Ozarks have this incredible rustic energy. She could not stop herself. Her arrogance was a toxic, overflowing reservoir. She was standing in my office bragging about a luxury cabin she was attempting to purchase, using my inherited agricultural farm as collateral. She thought she was speaking in clever, subtle codes. She thought she was twisting a knife into my ribs. She had no idea she was handing a loaded weapon to an executioner. Nature certainly provides excellent clarity, I replied, my voice smooth and rhythmic. The Ozarks are beautiful. Just ensure the ground you choose to build your foundation on is structurally sound. Sinkholes are incredibly common in southern Missouri. One day you are standing on solid rock, and the next second, the earth simply opens up and swallows everything you own. Valerie blinked, momentarily confused by the geological reference. The subtext flew entirely over her bleached head. She dismissed the comment with a wave of her hand, picking up her leather handbag. Well, I should let you get back to your spreadsheets. Do not work too hard, Candace. Try to relax. She turned on her heel and strutted out of the office. The heavy glass door swung shut behind her, sealing the room. The toxic cloud of her floral perfume lingered in the air, a final, lingering insult. I remained seated at my desk for a full 60 seconds. I watched through the interior window as she navigated the manufacturing lobby, treating the security guards with the same condescending arrogance she brought into my workspace. I waited until her luxury SUV pulled out of the visitor parking lot and merged onto the highway. The polite corporate mask I wore for her benefit instantly dissolved. My jaw locked. My pulse settled into a slow, methodical rhythm. Valerie wanted a foundation. I was going to give her a crater. I picked up the secure landline on my desk. I bypassed the standard customer service extensions and dialed a direct unlisted number for the regional banking director. His name was Marcus, and he managed the corporate accounts for my aerospace firm as well as holding the master portfolio for my private agricultural trust. Marcus answered on the second ring, his voice professional and crisp. Marcus, this is Candace West, I said, leaning back in my leather chair. I need to initiate a Level 1 fraud freeze on my Northern Missouri Agricultural Trust, effective immediately. I listened to the clicking of his keyboard through the receiver. A Level 1 freeze is absolute, Candace. It suspends all underwriting, halts any pending collateral transfers, and triggers an automatic internal investigation. Are you certain you want to deploy this protocol today? I pulled up the digital calendar on my monitor. Tomorrow morning, Derek was scheduled to board a flight to Miami. Tomorrow afternoon, the title company in the Ozarks would attempt to draw the final escrow payment using the forged collateral loan. I do not want the freeze deployed today, Marcus. I want the protocol locked into the automated system. Schedule the execution for exactly 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Furthermore, attach a secondary restriction to my joint marital checking and emergency credit accounts. Cut the access lines, zero the available balances, deny all incoming authorization requests. Marcus paused, sensing the gravity of the commands. An emergency credit restriction will flag every card attached to the ledger. If anyone attempts a transaction, the terminals will instantly hard decline. That is exactly the outcome I require, I confirmed. I disconnected the call and placed the receiver gently back onto its cradle. The machinery on the factory floor continued to hum a symphony of industrial progress. The board was now unequivocally set. The traps were armed. The timers were synchronized. Derek and Valerie were currently packing their expensive luggage, dreaming of ocean breezes and luxury cabins, completely unaware that their entire financial universe was scheduled for demolition. Tomorrow morning, they would walk into the airport. Tomorrow morning, the ground would finally open up and swallow them whole. The morning of the departure arrived with a pale gray light filtering through the bedroom blinds. Derek woke up before the alarm sounded. His energy was infectious, a buzzing, nervous excitement he attempted to disguise as paternal anxiety. He moved around the master suite with a spring in his step, zipping his expensive leather luggage, checking his passport, and adjusting the collar of his linen travel shirt. He was a man standing on the precipice of his dream life, entirely convinced he had engineered the perfect escape. I sat on the edge of the mattress, wrapped in a fleece robe, playing my part to the very last second. I handed him his travel itinerary and a thermos of dark roast coffee for the drive to the airport. He took the thermos, setting it on the nightstand, and sat beside me. He wrapped his arms around my shoulders, pulling me into a tight, theatrical embrace. The scent of his cedar cologne was overwhelming, masking the stale odor of his impending betrayal. "I know the timing of this trip is terrible," he murmured, his breath warm against my temple. "But I promise you, Candace, this is just about Harper. I need to get her head back in the right place. 2 weeks of family time will fix this sophomore slump. When I get back, we will celebrate our anniversary properly." I rested my chin on his shoulder, keeping my face hidden, so he could not see the cold emptiness in my eyes. "You are a good father, Derek. Do whatever it takes to help her. I will be fine here, preparing for Italy." He pulled back, offering a smile so genuine it almost looked like love. He kissed me softly on the forehead, grabbed his heavy leather duffel bag, and walked down the hallway. I followed him to the interior garage door, leaning against the frame as he loaded his luggage into the trunk of his sedan. He waved one final time, the garage door rumbling upward to reveal the quiet suburban street. The engine hummed, the tires backed out onto the concrete, and he drove away, speeding toward a flight to Miami. The heavy garage door descended, hitting the floor with a definitive thud. The silence that followed was not lonely. It was the sound of a vacuum sealing, preparing for a high-pressure test. I turned away from the door and walked straight to my home office. I did not shed a single tear. I did not linger on the decade of shared memories embedded in the walls of this house. The Italian Vineyard tour was still looping on my secondary monitor. I reached out and closed the browser window, severing the digital decoy. The charade was officially over. I walked to the utility closet and retrieved a stack of heavy-duty corrugated cardboard boxes I had purchased from a commercial shipping vendor 3 days prior. I carried them into the master bedroom, unfolded them, and taped the seams with industrial adhesive. In the aerospace industry, clearing a warehouse of defective inventory requires systematic precision. You categorize, you pack, and you quarantine the compromised assets. I began with his closet. I did not rip his clothes from the hangers. I folded his tailored suits, his golf polos, and his expensive denim with meticulous care. I placed his leather shoes in individual dust bags. I emptied his bedside table, boxing up his reading glasses, his charging cables, and the silver watch I bought him for our 5th anniversary. I moved through the master bathroom, clearing his shaving kit and his imported cologne. Every item he owned went into a cardboard box. I loaded the sealed boxes onto a dolly and rolled them down the hallway, stacking them in a neat, uniform grid in the corner of the insulated garage. By 8:30 in the morning, the interior of the house was entirely purged of his existence. The closets were empty, the drawers were hollow. The physical erasure was swift, clean, and undeniable. Next, I retrieved a heavy steel toolbox from the top shelf of the garage. It was a vintage, rusted kit my father gave me when I moved away from the agricultural farm. Growing up in northern Missouri, you learn how to rely on your own hands. You learn how to fix a broken tractor belt, how to mend a wire fence, and how to secure your own property. I walked to the front door, unscrewed the mounting plate of the brass deadbolt, and pulled the cylinder from the wood. I replaced it with a brand new high-security lock set I procured from a commercial locksmith. The tumblers clicked into place with a satisfying metallic snap. I moved to the back patio door, repeating the process. Finally, I replaced the interior garage lock. The perimeter was now secure. The keys dangling on Derek's keyring were obsolete pieces of metal. He could no longer enter the sanctuary he had taken for granted. The physical lockdown was complete. The digital lockdown was next. I returned to my home office, sitting in my leather chair. The digital clock on the bottom corner of my monitor read 8:55. I had 5 minutes until Marcus, my regional banking director, executed the Level 1 fraud freeze. I opened the shared financial portals, keeping the tabs arranged side by side. On the left screen, the joint marital checking account displayed a healthy balance of $42,000. On the right screen, the emergency credit union card showed an available limit of $15,000. These were the lifelines Derek was relying on to fund his Miami excursions, his luxury dinners with Valerie, and any unexpected incidentals during his 2-week victory lap. I watched the clock tick forward. The seconds moved with agonizing, beautiful slowness. 8:57, 8:58, 8:59. At exactly 9 o'clock, I pressed the refresh key on my keyboard. The browser windows blinked, reloading the encrypted data. The green numbers on the joint checking account vanished, replaced by a stark red 0. A bold banner appeared across the top of the dashboard reading, "Account suspended, pending fraud review." I moved my mouse to the credit union portal and refreshed the page. The available limit dropped to 0. The status indicator shifted from active to restricted. The authorization pipeline was severed. Every piece of plastic sitting in Derek's leather wallet was now useless. My desk phone chimed. I picked up the receiver. "Candace, it is Marcus." The voice of my banking director was crisp and professional. "Report," I replied, my voice steady. "The protocol is active," Marcus confirmed. "The joint ledgers are frozen. The credit lines are restricted. More importantly, our legal department just processed the quiet title action on your Northern Agricultural Trust. The collateral loan Derek attempted to secure has been officially voided by the fraud department." I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the quiet suburban street. "And the title company in the Ozarks?" "They received the cancellation notice 3 minutes ago," Marcus said. "Without the collateral loan, the underwriting failed. The escrow account is starved of capital. The seller has been notified that the transaction is dead. The cabin deal has collapsed." "Thank you, Marcus. Keep the lockdown tight. Deny every incoming inquiry." I disconnected the call. The silence in the house was profound, heavy with the weight of total victory. I walked into the kitchen, the scent of lemon cleaner still lingering in the air. I reached into the pantry, pulled out a bag of premium dark roast coffee beans, and poured them into the grinder. The sharp mechanical whir of the blades broke the quiet, a harsh, industrial sound that felt like music. I brewed a fresh pot, the rich, earthy aroma filling the room. I poured the dark liquid into a ceramic mug, walked over to the granite island, and sat down. The board was swept clean. The locks were changed. The funds were erased. The Ozark dream was a pile of ashes. Derek and Valerie were currently sitting on a commercial flight descending toward the Florida coastline. They were drinking complimentary orange juice, laughing about their clever deception, dreaming of the luxury real estate waiting for them back home. They were speeding toward a reinforced concrete wall, entirely blind to the impending impact. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the bitter warmth slide down my throat. The Missouri morning stretched out before me, calm and unbothered. I rested my hands on the cool granite counter and waited for the shockwave to hit Miami. 1,200 miles south of my quiet Missouri kitchen, the dense, suffocating humidity of Miami pressed against the tinted windows of a premium black Cadillac Escalade. The luxury SUV merged seamlessly onto the MacArthur Causeway, gliding over the sparkling turquoise water of Biscayne Bay. Inside the cabin, the climate control blasted frigid air, creating a pristine artificial bubble that perfectly mirrored the illusion Derek and Valerie had constructed for themselves. Derek sat in the plush leather captain chair, a man vibrating with the intoxicating frequency of total victory. He wore a crisp white linen shirt, unbuttoned precisely to the second hole, a pair of expensive polarized sunglasses resting on the bridge of his nose. He looked out at the towering cruise ships docked in the distance, their massive white hulls gleaming under the punishing Florida sun. For the first time in his life, he felt like a true architect of destiny. He was no longer just a regional sales director pushing commercial brewing equipment to Midwestern factory managers. He was a kingmaker. He had successfully manipulated the board, secured the funding, and orchestrated a flawless escape. Sitting next to him, Valerie radiated a frantic, materialistic energy. She was dressed in a vibrant silk resort dress, her wrists heavy with layered gold bracelets that clinked together every time she moved. A cloud of overwhelming floral perfume filled the confined space of the vehicle, masking the faint smell of the leather upholstery. She held a digital tablet in her lap, aggressively scrolling through high-resolution photographs of a sprawling, timber-framed cabin located in the rugged Ozark Mountains. "We absolutely have to rip out that kitchen island," Valerie announced, her acrylic nail tapping sharply against the glass screen. "The granite is hideous. It looks like a cheap suburban subdivision. We are paying a premium for a rustic luxury aesthetic, Derek. I want raw-edge walnut countertops installed before the end of the summer, and the boat dock needs an expansion to fit a proper pontoon." Derek offered a smooth, indulging smile, leaning back into the headrest. "The escrow clears tomorrow morning, Val. The second the title company records the deed, you can hire whatever contractor you want. We have plenty of capital left over to renovate the kitchen." The dramatic irony hovering inside that vehicle was thick enough to choke on. Derek spoke with the absolute certainty of a man who believed his bank accounts were brimming with stolen cash. He firmly believed the forged collateral loan attached to my Northern Agricultural Trust was actively funding his Ozark kingdom. He envisioned the money sitting safely in a southern Missouri escrow vault, completely oblivious to the fact that the vault had been emptied, the loan voided, and the entire real estate transaction terminated, while he was somewhere over Georgia on a commercial flight. In the third row of the Escalade, separated by a physical and emotional chasm, sat 16-year-old Harper. She wore a pair of oversized noise-canceling headphones, her head leaning against the cool glass of the rear window. She stared out at the passing palm trees with vacant, exhausted eyes. Derek had not spoken a single word to his daughter since they retrieved their luggage from baggage claim. He did not ask how she was feeling. He did not inquire about her sophomore year stress. Harper was nothing more than a living prop, a human shield he had utilized to justify this elaborate Caribbean getaway. Her presence validated his co-parenting narrative, and now that they had arrived in Florida, her usefulness had expired. Valerie locked her tablet screen and turned her body toward Derek, a wicked, conspiratorial grin spreading across her face. "I still cannot believe you actually pulled this off," she murmured, lowering her voice so the driver could not overhear. "When you told me you were going to convince her to cancel the Napa Valley anniversary trip, I thought you were insane. But getting her to agree to a solo trip to Italy? That was masterful." Derek chuckled, a deep, resonant sound of pure arrogance. He adjusted his silver watch, a gift I had given him half a decade ago. Candace is highly predictable, he explained, his tone dripping with condescension. You just have to understand how her brain works. She is a supply chain manager. She is a drone, obsessed with logistics. If you present her with a massive emotional problem, she short-circuits. But if you give her a logistical puzzle, like planning a solitary vacation to a foreign country, she completely ignores the big picture. She buries her head in spreadsheets and itineraries. He looked out the window, watching the massive cruise terminal approaching on the horizon. I almost felt bad for her last night, he lied smoothly. I tried to pull an extra $8,000 from her savings account. I told her the transmission on my sedan was failing. She actually believed the story, but she got entirely bogged down in the accounting protocols. She insisted on writing a physical paper check to the mechanic for tax deduction purposes. She is so utterly blinded by the rules that she cannot see the game being played right in front of her. Valerie let out a sharp, mocking laugh. A paper check. She is pathetic. I bet she is sitting in the airport right now, highlighting a map of Florence, thinking she is on some profound journey of self-discovery. When are you going to send her the divorce papers? Derek reached into the breast pocket of his linen shirt, tapping the rectangular outline of his leather wallet. I will wait until we are in international waters, he decided, savoring the cruelty of the timeline. The ship has a premium satellite internet package. I will send her a quick email from the balcony of our suite while we are sailing toward the Bahamas. By the time she lands in Rome, the locks on the Ozark cabin will belong to us, and she will be stranded on another continent with no leverage. The Escalade descended the curving ramp of the causeway, entering the chaotic, bustling ecosystem of the Port of Miami. Traffic slowed to a crawl. Heavy diesel fumes mixed with the salty ocean breeze filtering through the air conditioning vents. Massive concrete terminals stretched along the waterfront, serving as the gateway to the Caribbean. The driver navigated the massive vehicle through a maze of orange traffic cones, finally pulling up to a designated unloading zone marked for Priority VIP Boarding. We are here, the driver announced, putting the vehicle in park. Derek unbuckled his seatbelt with a flourish. He stepped out into the punishing midday heat, the thick humidity instantly pressing against his crisp linen clothes. Valerie followed, sliding out of the cabin and adjusting her designer sunglasses. She took a deep breath, tilting her head back to admire the towering white hull of the luxury ocean liner looming above them. Harper climbed out of the back seat in silence, dragging her canvas backpack across the pavement. She stood slightly apart from her parents, her posture rigid and defensive. A uniformed cruise terminal porter immediately approached the curb, pushing a heavy brass luggage cart. Derek directed the porter with the easy, commanding authority of a wealthy benefactor. He pointed out the matching set of imported leather suitcases stowed in the trunk of the SUV. Take these straight to the owner suite priority lane, Derek instructed the porter, slipping a $20 bill from his pocket and handing it to the driver as a tip. Valerie hooked her arm through his, her gold bracelets chiming together in a melodic sequence. Let us go secure our upgraded dining packages before the prime reservations book up, she said, practically pulling him toward the massive glass doors of the terminal building. I want a table by the window at the steakhouse tonight. Derek patted the leather wallet resting in his breast pocket. He carried the primary joint checking debit card and the secondary emergency credit union card. He firmly believed those small rectangular pieces of plastic represented an endless reservoir of capital backed by my aerospace salary and my pristine credit score. Whatever you want, Val, Derek promised, his voice booming with artificial generosity. The sky is the limit. They walked toward the sliding glass doors of the terminal. They moved in perfect unison, stepping onto the polished tile floor of the ticketing pavilion. They were laughing, surrounded by the bustling energy of thousands of vacationers. They marched toward the VIP check-in desk, dragging their expensive luggage, completely oblivious to the devastating reality waiting for them at the payment terminal. Their empire was not merely crumbling. It had already been pulverized into dust. The terminal at the Port of Miami was a cathedral of manufactured leisure. High ceilings, sweeping glass windows, and the continuous dull roar of thousands of excited passengers preparing to board the floating city waiting outside. Derek and Valerie bypassed the winding economy lines, marching confidently down the red carpeted lane designated for VIP suite guests. The ticketing agent, a young woman in a crisp nautical uniform, greeted them with a wide professional smile. "Welcome to Royal Caribbean, sir," the agent said, typing rapidly on her keyboard. "I have your reservation for the owner suite. Before we issue your boarding passes and room keys, I just need to swipe the credit card you will be using for your onboard expense account." Derek offered a charming, easy smile, the kind he used to close multi-thousand-dollar brewing equipment deals. He reached into his linen breast pocket, pulling out his leather wallet. He extracted the primary joint checking debit card, placing it on the counter with a soft, confident tap. The plastic felt heavy with the promise of endless cocktails, premium dining, and uninhibited luxury. The agent slid the card through the terminal. The machine processed for a second, then emitted a short, sharp beep. The agent frowned slightly, looking at her monitor. "I'm sorry, sir, the card declined. Sometimes our terminal glitches. Let me try it one more time." She swiped it again. The exact same sharp beep echoed in the small space between them. Derek's smile faltered, dropping a fraction of an inch. A small knot of irritation formed in his chest. "That is impossible," he said, his tone shifting from charming to mildly annoyed. "It is a corporate tier debit account. There is over $40,000 sitting in there. Run it manually." The agent keyed the numbers in by hand. The screen flashed the same rejection code. "I apologize, Mr. West. The system is returning a hard decline. Do you have an alternative payment method?" Valerie shifted her weight, the gold bracelets clinking together. Her impatience was already simmering just below the surface. "Derek, just give her another card. We are holding up the line." Derek swallowed a faint prickle of unease brushing against his spine. He opened his wallet again. He bypassed his personal checking card, knowing the balance was dangerously low after paying the remote notary and the preliminary escrow fees. Instead, his fingers brushed against the secondary joint credit card, the emergency home repair card. He despised that piece of plastic. It represented practical, unglamorous suburban living. But right now, it was a necessary bridge. It had a $15,000 limit. It was more than enough to secure the onboard account until he could call the bank and sort out whatever security flag had triggered the primary decline. He handed the credit union card to the agent, offering a dismissive wave. "Use this one. My primary bank must have flagged the out-of-state transaction. They are overly cautious." The agent took the card, swiping it through the terminal. The machine processed. Beep! The sound was identical. The result was identical. The agent looked up, her professional smile completely gone, replaced by a look of cautious concern. "Sir, this card is also returning a hard decline. The error code indicates the account has been restricted by the issuer." Derek froze. The ambient noise of the busy terminal seemed to fade, replaced by a high-pitched ringing in his ears. Restricted. A bank might freeze a debit card for a suspicious travel charge, but they do not restrict a separate credit line operated by an entirely different financial institution simultaneously. Valerie stepped closer, her voice sharp and piercing. "Derek, what is going on? Why are your cards bouncing at a check-in desk?" He held up a hand, demanding silence. "Let me call my wife," he muttered, pulling his mobile phone from his pocket. "She manages the logistics. She probably triggered a security hold by mistake." He stepped away from the counter, dialing my number. 1,200 miles away, sitting at my granite kitchen island in Missouri, I watched my phone light up. The caller ID flashed his name. I did not answer. I let the phone ring, the sound vibrating against the stone, a steady rhythmic pulse. Derek listened to the automated voicemail, greeting the panic rising in his throat. He hung up and typed a frantic text message, his thumbs flying across the screen. He leaned on his trademark manipulation, the paternal guilt trip that had served him so well for the past 10 years. My daughter needs both her parents there. Stop being petty and unblock the joint card. I will pay you back. He hit send, staring at the screen, waiting for the little bubbles indicating I was typing a reply. I picked up my phone, the dark roast coffee sitting untouched in my ceramic mug. I read his message. It was the frantic, flailing attempt of a man who realized the ground was crumbling beneath his feet, but still refused to believe he was falling. He thought I was being petty. He thought this was a minor administrative hurdle, a temporary block I could reverse with a simple phone call. I smiled. I set my mug down and typed out the payload I had been carrying for 2 weeks. I agree Harper needs her parents. Enjoy the trip. By the way, because you used a fraudulent notary for the Ozark cabin, the bank canceled your loan. Escrow failed. Also, the locks are changed. Bring a lawyer when you get back. I hit send. At the VIP check-in desk in Miami, Derek watched the notification drop onto his screen. He read the first sentence, feeling a momentary surge of relief. Then his eyes moved to the second sentence. Fraudulent notary. His heart slammed against his ribs. The air in his lungs vanished. Ozark cabin. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. The color literally bled out of him, replaced by a cold, paralyzing terror. Bank canceled your loan. Escrow failed. His knees weakened, buckling slightly under his weight. He gripped the edge of the ticketing counter to keep himself standing. The entire architecture of his secret life, the luxury cabin, the stolen equity, the carefully orchestrated reunion with his ex-wife had not just collapsed. It had been systematically detonated by a woman he thought was busy looking at pictures of Italian vineyards. She knew. She knew everything. Valerie grabbed his arm, her acrylic nails digging into his linen sleeve. Derek, you look like you were going to vomit. What did she say? What is wrong with the accounts? He could not speak. His throat was entirely closed off. He stared blindly at the ticketing agent, who was now holding his 2 useless pieces of plastic, waiting for a resolution that was never going to come. His phone buzzed again. It was an automated email notification from the title company in southern Missouri. The subject line read, "Urgent escrow termination notice." The trap had closed. The steel jaws had snapped shut, severing every possible avenue of escape. He was standing in one of the most expensive zip codes in the country, surrounded by luxury, and he possessed absolutely zero capital. He could not board the ship. He could not close on the house. He could not even return to the suburban sanctuary he had abandoned just hours ago because the locks were changed and a ruthless family law attorney was waiting for him. The devastation was absolute. But the immediate, visceral nightmare was only just beginning. Because standing right next to him was a woman who did not handle disappointment well. Valerie had been promised a kingdom, and Derek was about to explain that he could not even afford to buy her a cup of coffee. The ticketing agent stared at the 2 declined pieces of plastic resting on the counter. Derek stood frozen, his eyes locked on the text message glowing on his phone screen. The ambient noise of the cruise terminal seemed to amplify a chaotic symphony of excited vacationers that felt entirely disconnected from the catastrophic collapse occurring inside his mind. Valerie, impatient and demanding, snatched the phone from his hand. She read the message, her eyes widened, scanning the words fraudulent notary and escrow failed. The reality of the situation crashed over her with the force of a tidal wave. She was not a woman who handled adversity with grace. She operated on a strict diet of status luxury and instant gratification. What does she mean the bank canceled your loan? Valerie demanded, her voice rising above the dull roar of the crowd. Derek, did you not tell me the financing for the cabin was completely secure? Derek swallowed hard, attempting to regain a fraction of his lost composure. Keep your voice down, Val, he hissed, his tone desperate. I can fix this. Candace is just throwing a tantrum. I need to call my attorney. You forged a notary document. Valerie shrieked, entirely ignoring his request for discretion. People in the adjacent VIP line began to turn their heads, drawn by the sudden escalating volume of her voice. You told me you had the capital. You told me the Ozark property was a done deal. I did have the capital, he argued, the panic bleeding into his words. I just needed to leverage her agricultural trust to cover the underwriting gap. It was a temporary measure. I was going to pay it off after my next quarter commissions. Valerie stared at him, her expression shifting from shock to profound, unadulterated disgust. She realized in that exact moment that the grand foundation Derek had promised her was built entirely on a bed of quicksand. He was not a wealthy kingmaker. He was a fraudster. A man who had attempted to steal his wife's inheritance to fund an illusion he could not sustain. And now, he was broke. You dragged me all the way to Florida for a luxury vacation we cannot even pay for, she yelled, stepping back from him, as if his sudden poverty was contagious. You are facing felony fraud charges, Derek. Do you understand what that means? I am not going down for this. I did not sign those fake documents. She spun around, facing the ticketing agent. Cancel the reservation, Valerie barked. I am not setting foot on that ship with him. The agent, clearly uncomfortable with the public domestic dispute, nodded quickly. I understand, ma'am. I will void the boarding passes. Derek watched his ex-wife turn her back on him, leaving him stranded at the counter. The woman he had risked everything to impress was abandoning ship before it even left the dock. His ego, battered and bruised, demanded an immediate retreat. He could not stand in the middle of a crowded terminal and endure this humiliation. I am leaving, he announced, his voice tight. We will deal with this back in Missouri. He grabbed the handles of his imported leather luggage and marched toward the glass exit doors, leaving Valerie and Harper standing in his wake. He pushed through the heavy doors, the oppressive Miami humidity hitting him like a physical blow. He navigated the chaotic drop-off zone, searching for the designated luxury rental car lot. He spotted the black Cadillac Escalade he had rented for their ground transportation. It was parked in a designated commercial loading zone. But something was wrong. A heavy-duty tow truck was positioned directly in front of the SUV. A burly man in a reflective vest was securing a thick steel chain to the front axle of the Cadillac. Derek dropped his luggage, breaking into a sprint. Hey! He yelled, waving his arms. What are you doing? That is my rental! The tow truck operator barely glanced at him, continuing to tighten the winch cable. Not anymore, buddy. Dispatch just sent an immediate retrieval order. The credit card holding the deposit for this vehicle just returned a hard decline. Derek stared at the operator, his chest heaving. The secondary credit union card. He had used the emergency home repair card to secure the rental deposit 2 weeks ago. When I deployed the financial freeze, the authorization pipeline was severed. The rental agency, unable to verify the funds, immediately flagged the vehicle for repossession. I can give you another card, Derek pleaded, patting his linen pockets in a frantic, useless gesture. The operator shook his head, climbing into the cab of the tow truck. Too late. The contract is voided. You need to contact the agency if you want to rebook. Derek stood on the blistering pavement, watching the tow truck pull his luxury rental car out of the lot and merge onto the busy causeway. He was literally stranded. He possessed zero access to marital funds, his credit lines were dead, his real estate deal was terminated, and he was currently standing on a sidewalk in Miami with a pile of expensive luggage he could not transport anywhere. The poetic justice was absolute. He had attempted to steal my mobility, my security, and my heritage. In return, I had stripped away his transportation, his housing, and his dignity. Inside the terminal, Harper watched her father disappear through the glass doors. She was 16 years old, caught in the crossfire of a detonation she did not fully comprehend. Valerie was too busy frantically booking a solo return flight on her personal credit card to pay any attention to her daughter. Harper pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed the only number that represented stability. I was sitting at my kitchen island when the phone rang. I answered immediately. Candace. Harper's voice trembled, a fragile, terrified sound that broke my heart. Dad and Mom are screaming at each other. Dad's cards are not working. Mom is leaving. I do not know what is happening. I took a slow breath, keeping my voice steady and warm. I need you to listen to me very carefully, Harper. Everything is going to be all right. You are not in any trouble. Your father made some very bad choices, and he is dealing with the consequences. But I am going to get you out of there. I opened my laptop, pulling up the airline reservation portal. I had anticipated this exact scenario. I knew Derek would abandon his responsibilities the second his ego was threatened. I am booking you a direct flight back to St. Louis right now, I told her. The ticket will be in your email in 2 minutes. Do you have your ID? Yes, she sniffled, wiping her eyes. Good. Go straight to the airline terminal. Do not wait for your parents. I will be waiting for you at the baggage claim when you land. I processed the payment using my personal independent checking account. I forwarded the boarding pass to her phone. I tracked her location through a family sharing app, watching the blue dot move away from the cruise terminal and toward the airport departure gates. I had executed a flawless tactical strike against my husband. I had destroyed his illicit empire and exposed his criminal behavior. But true victory is not merely about destruction. It is about protecting the innocent civilians caught in the blast radius. I closed my laptop and walked toward the front door. The house was quiet, secure, and entirely mine. I grabbed my car keys, preparing to drive to the airport. Derek was stranded in a humid nightmare of his own making. But Harper was coming home. The flight from Miami to St. Louis takes precisely 3 hours and 15 minutes. I tracked Harper boarding her commercial aircraft through the airline application on my phone, watching the status update to a confirmed departure. I had ample time before I needed to park at the arrivals terminal. I merged my sedan onto the interstate, pointing the hood toward my aerospace logistics facility. I had an emergency supply chain meeting on the calendar, and for the first time in a decade, I was driving to work without carrying the invisible, crushing weight of my husband. In industrial engineering, parasitic drag is a term used to describe any component of an aircraft that produces wind resistance without contributing to lift. It slows the machine down. It forces the engines to burn excess fuel just to maintain a baseline altitude. Derek had been my parasitic drag. I spent 10 years allocating a massive portion of my daily cognitive bandwidth to managing his ego, balancing his financial blind spots, and organizing his chaotic existence. I absorbed his stress so he could charm his brewing clients. I handled the mundane realities of his life so he could pretend to be a king. As I swiped my security badge at the perimeter gate of my corporate campus, I realized the drag was entirely gone. The engines were running clean. My mind felt astonishingly sharp, flooded with a level of clarity and focus I had not experienced since my 20s. I walked into the primary executive boardroom. The space was bathed in cool, white fluorescent light, the massive mahogany table surrounded by senior engineers and procurement directors. We were facing a critical bottleneck involving a delayed shipment of aerospace-grade titanium from an overseas vendor. The delay threatened to halt the assembly of a commercial fuselage, a failure that would cost the company millions in contractual penalties. I took my seat at the head of the table. I did not feel the usual thrum of corporate anxiety. I opened my laptop and projected the global supply chain schematics onto the wall monitor. I navigated the complex logistical web with surgical precision. I identified a secondary domestic supplier, rerouted a fleet of specialized freight carriers, and authorized a temporary budget reallocation to cover the expedited shipping fees. I dismantled the crisis in under 20 minutes, offering solutions so streamlined and mathematically sound that the room fell into a stunned, appreciative silence. I was operating at maximum capacity because my personal infrastructure was finally structurally secure. While I was optimizing supply routes in a climate-controlled Missouri boardroom, a vastly different corporate mechanism was engaging 1,200 miles away. Derek remained stranded on the blistering concrete curb outside the Miami cruise terminal. The oppressive Florida sun beat down mercilessly, soaking the back of his crisp linen travel shirt in sweat. His designer sunglasses did nothing to shield his eyes from the harsh, blinding reality of his situation. His luxury rental car had been towed. His ex-wife had abandoned him, fleeing the terminal in a rideshare vehicle she hailed on her own dime. His daughter was currently soaring through the stratosphere, returning to the very woman he had attempted to financially destroy. He sat on his heavy leather suitcase, desperately cycling his mobile phone on and off, praying the restricted error codes on his banking applications were merely a temporary digital glitch. He was grasping at the fading vapors of his illusion. Then his mobile phone began to ring. The caller identification displayed the name Richard Vance. Richard was the senior vice president of sales at the commercial brewing equipment manufacturer where Derek had spent his entire career. He was a ruthless, profit-driven executive who did not tolerate liabilities. Derek cleared his dry throat, plastering a fake hearty tone over his rising panic. He swiped the screen to accept the connection. "Richard, great to hear from you. I am just about to board the ship for my family vacation. Can I call you back when we hit our first port of call?" "Do not get on a boat, Derek," Richard snapped. The voice echoing through the speaker was jagged with fury. "Where are you right now?" Derek flinched, holding the device tighter against his ear. "I am at the Miami terminal. Is something wrong with the new fermentation tank contract we drafted yesterday?" "The contract is dead," Richard barked. "The entire regional portfolio is currently suspended. My legal compliance team just received an emergency injunction notice from the legal counsel representing the Heartland Brewing Cooperative." A fresh wave of terror washed over Derek. The Heartland Brewing Cooperative was the largest client in their corporate portfolio. They were also the entity that leased the 300 acres of northern Missouri agricultural land belonging to my private trust. When my attorney filed the quiet title action and Marcus initiated the Level 1 fraud freeze, the bank was legally obligated to notify all commercial leaseholders attached to the contested property. The cooperative received a formal notice that the deed to the land they operated on was suddenly clouded by a fraudulent collateral loan. The compliance officers at the cooperative reviewed the loan documentation and instantly recognized the signature of the man who sold them their industrial equipment. "Derek, did you forge a remote notary seal to leverage a piece of agricultural real estate owned by your wife?" Richard demanded, his voice echoing loudly enough for passing tourists to hear. "Did you attempt to secure a luxury cabin using land that our most valuable client operates on?" Derek stood up, his legs trembling beneath him. He paced a tight circle on the scorching pavement. "Richard, it is a massive misunderstanding. Candace and I are going through a messy marital separation. She is retaliating. It is a clerical error regarding a tax document. I can explain everything when I get back to the office." "Do not bother coming back to the office," Richard interrupted, his tone shifting from angry to utterly absolute. You crossed a catastrophic line. You committed felony financial fraud involving a property intrinsically tied to our primary revenue stream. The cooperative views your actions as a massive ethical breach. They are threatening to freeze all outstanding purchase orders unless we immediately sever all ties with you. You have created an unforgivable corporate liability. Richard, please, Derek begged, the last remnants of his pride evaporating in the humid air. I have generated millions in revenue for this company. I am your top regional director. Give me a week to sort out the divorce logistics. I will clear the title. You do not have a week. You do not have 5 minutes, Richard stated coldly. You are terminated, effective immediately. Your corporate email has already been locked. Your company vehicle is being repossessed from the long-term airport parking lot in St. Louis. I suggest you retain aggressive criminal defense counsel, Derek. The corporate legal department is fully cooperating with the Missouri District Attorney regarding your forged documentation. We are handing over your entire digital footprint. The call disconnected with a sharp electronic click. Derek lowered the phone slowly, staring blankly at the darkened screen. The bustling activity of the cruise terminal continued around him, a vibrant world of leisure and wealth that he was suddenly permanently exiled from. He was standing on a sidewalk in a city where he knew absolutely no one, clutching a dead mobile device, surrounded by imported luggage he had no way to transport. He had no job, he had no income, he possessed no corporate leverage and no marital shield. The corporate execution was swift, brutal, and entirely justified. In the American business sector, companies will tolerate arrogant salesmen, but they will instantly amputate a criminal liability that threatens their bottom line. Derek thought his charm could talk him out of any corner. He learned too late that charm holds absolutely zero currency against a documented paper trail of felony fraud. Back in Missouri, I concluded my logistics meeting. The engineering team filed out of the boardroom, their expressions relaxed and confident in the new supply chain trajectory I had established. I remained in my leather chair for a moment, closing my laptop and sliding it into my briefcase. My phone chimed with a secure, encrypted text message from Joanna. The brewing cooperative executed the breach of ethics protocol. Your husband is officially unemployed. The structural collapse is complete. We file the formal divorce petition tomorrow morning. I read the message, locking my phone screen and placing the device in my pocket. The timeline was holding perfectly. Every trap I set had triggered with flawless precision. I walked out of the boardroom, my heels clicking a steady, victorious rhythm against the polished corporate floors. It was time to leave the aerospace facility. I had a flight to track a daughter to pick up from the arrivals terminal, and a final courtroom strategy to prepare. The absolute destruction of his secret life was satisfying, but ensuring my own permanent freedom was the ultimate objective. The St. Louis County Courthouse is an imposing structure constructed from heavy limestone and uncompromising Midwestern pragmatism. The architecture does not invite comfort or offer solace. It is a building designed to demand absolute accountability. 4 weeks after the catastrophic implosion at the Miami cruise terminal, I walked through the metal detectors, wearing a tailored navy blazer and a pair of sensible heels. I did not feel the typical anxiety associated with legal proceedings. I felt the calm, cold anticipation of a project manager arriving to oversee a scheduled demolition. My attorney, Joanna Pierce, walked beside me. She carried a sleek leather litigation briefcase, her posture radiating the dangerous, quiet energy of a predator who already knew the exact outcome of the hunt. We navigated the echoing corridors, our footsteps moving in perfect synchronization, and entered the assigned courtroom. Derek was already seated at the respondent table. The physical transformation he had undergone in just 28 days was staggering. For a decade, I had only ever seen him draped in custom-tailored Italian wool, his wrists adorned with silver timepieces, his confidence subsidized by generous corporate expense accounts. Today, he wore an off-the-rack dark gray polyester suit that bunched awkwardly across his shoulders. The fabric looked stiff and cheap. The golden tan he had acquired under the Florida sun had entirely faded, leaving his skin a sickly, anxious pallor. He looked older, smaller, and profoundly exhausted. The arrogant kingmaker was gone, replaced by a desperate, hollow shell of a man facing the devastating reality of his own hubris. The presiding authority was Judge Harrison, a woman in her late 50s with sharp, discerning eyes and a reputation for maintaining a zero-tolerance policy regarding financial abuse. She took her seat behind the elevated mahogany bench, adjusted her reading glasses, and called the session to order. Derek was called to testify first, guided by a defense attorney who looked perpetually stressed. When Derek spoke, he immediately deployed the only weapon he had left in his arsenal. He attempted to manipulate the narrative. He adopted a soft, wounded tone, leaning into the microphone to ensure every tremor in his voice was captured by the court reporter. He spun a masterful fictional tale, painting himself as a dedicated father who was merely trying to orchestrate a healing vacation for his troubled teenage daughter. He portrayed me as a deeply paranoid, jealous, and vindictive spouse. He claimed I engineered his corporate termination out of spite because I could not tolerate him spending time with his ex-wife for the sake of their child. He suggested the financial discrepancies were simple accounting errors, innocent mistakes made by a busy salesman juggling too many responsibilities. I sat at the petitioner table, keeping my spine perfectly straight and my expression entirely vacant. I listened to his fabricated story without a single flinch. In the aerospace supply chain sector, when a failing vendor blames the shipping logistics for missing inventory, you do not engage in an emotional argument about their excuses. You simply wait for them to finish talking, and then you produce the tracking receipts. Joanna did not object to his testimony. She allowed him to dig the hole deeper, granting him the rope he needed to hang himself. When the defense attorney concluded his direct examination, Joanna stood up. She did not raise her voice. She did not utilize theatrical outrage or dramatic pacing. She simply picked up her briefcase, walked over to the clerk, and extracted 3 massive, thickly bound legal binders. She dropped them onto the wooden evidence desk. The heavy, localized thud echoed sharply through the quiet courtroom, making Derek physically flinch in his chair. "Your Honor," Joanna began, her voice a smooth, lethal hum. "The respondent has presented a compelling narrative regarding innocent mistakes and wifely paranoia. However, the documentation paints a vastly different picture. We submit Exhibit A, a comprehensive forensic audit of the marital ledgers." Joanna opened the first binder. She did not argue with Derek. She dismantled him with data. She presented the hidden wire transfers tracing every single stolen dollar from our joint savings directly into the Ozark Real Estate Holding Trust. She displayed the exact dates proving the cruise and the cabin were planned over 6 months ago, entirely destroying his timeline of a sudden co-parenting crisis. Derek shifted uncomfortably, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. His defense attorney shuffled his papers, suddenly looking incredibly pale. Joanna moved to the second binder. "Furthermore, Your Honor, we submit Exhibit B. The respondent claims these were mere accounting errors. We contend they were calculated acts of extortion and identity theft." She projected a printed screenshot of the text message Derek sent me the night before his flight, demanding $8,500 for a fabricated transmission repair. She then displayed the exact invoice required by the Ozark Title Company, matching the dollar amount down to the final cent. The judge scrutinized the documents, her lips pressing into a thin white line of absolute disapproval. But the final strike was yet to come. Joanna opened the third binder, extracting a certified copy of the deed of trust filed in northern Missouri. Finally, we submit. Exhibit C. Joanna announced, the temperature in the room plummeting. The respondent attempted to secure a collateral loan using my client's protected premarital agricultural trust. He achieved this by digitally altering a limited tax document and securing a fraudulent verification from a remote online notary. We have subpoenaed the IP address routing logs from his corporate office, which confirm the falsified documents were uploaded and authorized from his personal work terminal. The silence in the courtroom became a physical weight, pressing down on everyone present. Derek stared at the wooden table in front of him, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. He possessed no charming rebuttal. He could not smile his way out of an IP address verification. The sheer volume of undeniable, irrefutable evidence stripped away his every defense, leaving him entirely exposed. Judge Harrison did not deliberate long. She possessed a Midwestern pragmatism that despised individuals who wasted the court's time with blatant perjury. She looked down at Derek with an expression of profound disgust, shuffling the evidence binders into a neat stack. "Mr. West," the judge stated, her voice slicing through the air with surgical precision. "I have presided over family court for 2 decades. I have seen spouses hide assets, and I have seen spouses lie. But the level of premeditated, systemic financial fraud you have attempted to execute against your wife is truly staggering. Your testimony today borders on an insult to the intelligence of this court." She raised her gavel, delivering the final, devastating mandates. "I am granting the petitioner exclusive, immediate possession of the suburban marital residence. The respondent forfeits all claims to the equity of said property as partial restitution for the depleted joint accounts. Furthermore, the Northern Agricultural Trust remains entirely protected and unencumbered as the encumbrance was achieved through illicit means." Derek slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. He had lost the house. He had lost the money. He was walking out of the courthouse with absolutely nothing but the cheap polyester suit on his back. But the execution was not complete. Judge Harrison leaned forward, peering over the rim of her glasses. "Additionally, this court cannot ignore the severe criminal implications presented in Exhibit C. Forging a legal document to secure real estate financing crosses the boundary of civil litigation. I am formally forwarding the forensic notary logs, the altered power of attorney, and the IP routing data to the St. Louis County District Attorney for immediate criminal review." A sharp gasp escaped Derek's throat. He looked up, his eyes wide with a primal, unadulterated terror. The civil divorce was over, but the criminal nightmare was just beginning. He was officially facing felony prosecution, a trajectory that could easily end in a state penitentiary. I sat perfectly still, absorbing the magnitude of the ruling. I had engineered a flawless defensive perimeter, protecting my assets, my legacy, and my future. I watched the bailiff escort a completely broken man out of the courtroom, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Joanna closed her briefcase, offering me a brief, satisfied nod. The surgical extraction was successful. The parasite had been removed. I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sunlight. The air tasted incredibly sweet. I had won the war securing my financial and emotional independence. However, the detonation of Derek's life created a massive blast radius, and there were still fragments falling from the sky. While Derek was facing his criminal reality, Valerie was experiencing her own terrifying freefall. Without his money and his status, her luxurious world had instantly imploded, leaving her frantically searching for someone else to blame. And caught in the middle of their toxic crossfire was a 16-year-old girl who desperately needed a place to land. 6 months passed. The blistering humidity of the Florida summer gave way to the crisp, golden autumn of the American Midwest. The transition of the seasons mirrored the profound transition occurring within my own life. The chaotic, adrenaline-fueled warfare of the previous summer was over. The dust had settled, the legal boundaries were drawn in permanent ink, and the landscape that remained was quiet, peaceful, and entirely mine. I stood on the wraparound porch of the Missouri suburban house, wrapped in a thick wool cardigan, holding a mug of steaming black coffee. The morning air was sharp and clean. The neighborhood was quiet, the only sound coming from a gentle breeze rustling through the drying maple leaves. The house looked different now. It was no longer a stage for a deceptive marriage. I had spent the last several months systematically purging every lingering trace of Derek. I donated his oversized leather recliner. I repainted the dining room walls a soft, calming sage green. I replaced the heavy masculine area rugs with bright woven textiles. The physical space finally reflected the lightness I felt internally. It was a sanctuary, unburdened by the parasitic drag of a man who constantly took more than he offered. Derek's trajectory had taken a vastly different path. The St. Louis County District Attorney pursued the felony fraud charges with unyielding aggression. The forensic evidence Joanna and I compiled was too precise, too undeniable to ignore. The falsified remote notary logs and the corporate IP address routing data formed an ironclad case. Derek attempted to secure a plea deal, leveraging his status as a first-time offender. But the sheer arrogance of leveraging a protected agricultural trust worked against him. He was convicted of felony financial fraud, the judge noting the premeditated nature of the crime and the exploitation of a spouse's inheritance, sentenced him to 3 years in a state correctional facility, followed by 5 years of heavily monitored probation. He was ordered to pay substantial financial restitution, a debt that would permanently garnish any future wages he managed to earn upon his release. The charming, arrogant regional sales director was now a disgraced felon, stripped of his suits, his status, and his freedom. Valerie's descent was less structured, but equally devastating. When Derek's financial illusion imploded at the Miami cruise terminal, Valerie realized she had tethered her future to a sinking ship. She immediately severed all ties with him, attempting to distance herself from the impending criminal investigation. However, the fallout from the failed Ozark cabin escrow proved inescapable. Because she was listed as a co-buyer on the initial purchase agreement, the title company pursued her for the preliminary breach of contract penalties. Her luxurious lifestyle, previously subsidized by her own questionable credit practices, collapsed under the sudden financial strain. She was forced to sell her upscale suburban home, liquidating her designer assets just to cover the legal fees and avoid personal bankruptcy. She relocated to a cramped, inexpensive apartment on the far side of the county, her dreams of rustic luxury permanently extinguished. The two people who thought they could outsmart and outmaneuver me were now permanently fractured, destroyed by the very greed that brought them together. But amidst the wreckage of their deception, a genuine, beautiful redemption story emerged. Harper chose to stay. When I booked her the emergency flight back from Miami, I made a conscious decision. I was severing ties with her father, but I refused to abandon a 16-year-old girl to the chaotic, toxic gravity of her biological parents. When Harper landed in St. Louis, confused and deeply traumatized by the explosive confrontation at the cruise terminal, I was waiting for her at the baggage claim. I did not speak poorly of Derek or Valerie. I did not demand loyalty. I simply offered her stability. Over the past 6 months, Harper and I navigated a complex emotional transition. It was not always easy. There were evenings filled with tears and angry questions she directed at a father who was no longer there to answer them. But through the turbulent waves of her grief, we built a new foundation based on mutual respect and radical honesty. When the divorce finalized and the financial injunctions were lifted, I revealed a secret I had guarded fiercely. During the initial asset freeze, I quietly transferred the entirety of Harper's College Savings Fund into a secure, independent trust, completely shielding it from the marital asset division and Derek's impending restitution mandates. The money Derek had promised to use for her education was safe, fully funded, and entirely under her future control. When I handed her the trust documents, Harper sat at the granite kitchen island and wept. They were not tears of sorrow, but tears of profound relief. She realized that while her biological parents viewed her as a convenient pawn, I viewed her as a priority. She chose to spend her weekends at my house, opting for the quiet stability of my newly renovated home over the chaotic tension of her mother's cramped apartment. We cooked dinner together, we discussed her college applications, and we slowly rebuilt a family dynamic that felt authentic. I was not her biological mother, and I did not try to replace Valerie. I was simply the steady grounding force she needed to navigate the wreckage her parents left behind. I finished my coffee, the ceramic mug warming my hands against the autumn chill. I walked back inside, setting the mug on the counter, and grabbed my car keys. I had an appointment to keep, one that represented the final, ultimate victory of this entire ordeal. I drove 2 hours north, leaving the sprawling suburbs of St. Louis behind. The landscape shifted, the concrete giving way to rolling, fertile plains. I turned off the main highway, my tires crunching against a long gravel driveway. I parked my sedan in front of a sprawling expanse of rich, dark soil. It was the 300 acres of agricultural land my father had left me, the land Derek had viewed as idle dirt, the land he had attempted to leverage to build his fantasy life. I stepped out of the car, breathing in the scent of damp earth and drying corn stalks. The property was beautiful, a silent, powerful testament to resilience and heritage. A silver pickup truck was parked near the edge of the field. A man wearing a heavy canvas jacket and work boots walked toward me, extending a calloused hand. It was the regional director of the Heartland Brewing Cooperative. "Candace," he greeted, his voice warm and respectful. "It is good to see you out here. The fields are looking strong this season." "It is good to be here," I replied, shaking his hand firmly. We walked toward the hood of his truck, where a thick manila folder rested against the metal. The cooperative had terminated Derek's employment the moment they discovered his fraudulent activities, instantly severing the toxic link between my personal assets and their corporate operations. But they recognized the value of the land, and they respected the ruthless efficiency with which I handled the crisis. "I reviewed the revised contract terms you sent over," the director said, opening the folder. "You drive a hard bargain, Candace. But given the yield we pulled from this acreage last year, the board authorized the increase. We are prepared to sign a 10-year exclusive lease agreement at the new premium rate." I nodded, retrieving a pen from my blazer pocket. The new contract effectively doubled the passive income generated by the farm. It was a massive financial windfall, securing my independence for the next decade. I signed the documents, the ink flowing smoothly across the paper. There was no hesitation. There was no underlying anxiety. The land was entirely mine, unencumbered and protected. I had defended my roots, and now those roots were feeding my future. I shook the director's hand one final time, finalizing the agreement. I stood alone near the edge of the field, watching his truck kick up a cloud of dust as he drove back toward the main road. The Missouri sky stretched above me, a vast, unbroken expanse of brilliant blue. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, looking at the illuminated screen. It was a text message from Joanna, my attorney, but she was not writing in a professional capacity. We had developed a genuine friendship over the past 6 months, bonded by the surgical precision of the war we fought together. The message was brief and direct. I just cleared a massive trial off my docket. I need a vacation. Do you still have those itineraries for the boutique vineyards in Napa Valley? I read the text, a wide, genuine smile breaking across my face. The anniversary trip I had meticulously planned, the trip Derek had callously canceled to orchestrate his betrayal, was still sitting in a digital folder on my laptop. It was a flawless itinerary, featuring private tasting rooms, luxury accommodations, and stunning views of the California hills. It was a trip designed for celebration, and I finally had something truly profound to celebrate. I typed a reply, my thumbs moving swiftly across the screen. Absolutely. Pack your bags. We are going to drink the good wine. I hit send. I slid the phone back into my pocket, turning to look at my farm one last time. I did not need to scream, throw plates, or engage in chaotic emotional warfare to reclaim my life. I used Midwestern pragmatism, corporate precision, and the quiet, devastating power of a paper trail. I walked back to my car, the gravel crunching beneath my heels. I opened the door, started the engine, and drove toward the highway. The parasitic drag was gone. The altitude was steady, and the horizon, for the first time in 10 years, was entirely clear. There is a distinctly American mythology woven tightly into the fabric of the traditional family structure. From the time we are young, we are conditioned to revere the portrait of the unbroken home, the manicured suburban lawn, the predictable Sunday dinners, and the biological parents standing shoulder to shoulder in the driveway, smiling for the holiday card. In the heart of the Midwest, where quiet pragmatism meets a deep-seated cultural desire for propriety, this image is guarded fiercely. We are taught that maintaining this picture, keeping the unit intact at all costs, is the ultimate, undeniable expression of family responsibility. But what happens when the portrait in the frame is a forgery? In the story of Candace, Derek, and Harper, we are confronted with a chilling reality that plays out behind thousands of closed doors every single day. Derek weaponized the ultimate cultural sacred cow, the emotional well-being of his child, to camouflage his own deceit. "My daughter needs both her parents there," he wrote from a humid Miami cruise terminal, attempting to use 16-year-old Harper as a human shield for his financial and emotional crimes. He relied on the conventional societal assumption that a maternal figure will always compromise her own boundaries, shrinking herself to keep the family unit running smoothly. He was wrong. And in his miscalculation, we uncover a profound masterclass in what true parenting, emotional awareness, and long-term guidance actually require. We live in a society that often romanticizes biological ties, sometimes to a dangerous fault. We tell ourselves that a child inherently needs their mother and father together, regardless of the toxicity, resentment, or manipulation simmering just beneath the surface. Derek and Valerie Harper's biological parents treated their daughter not as a developing human being with fragile emotional needs, but as a convenient prop in their theater of self-gratification. They bought her a ticket on a luxury ocean liner, mistaking financial expenditure for parental presence. This highlights a fatal flaw in modern performative parenting. Buying a teenager a vacation does not require emotional awareness. It requires a credit card. Real parenting, the grueling, unglamorous daily work of raising a child into a functional adult, requires fairness, consistency, and an unwavering commitment to honesty. When a parent lies to a spouse, they are inherently lying to the child who lives under that same roof. Derek believed he was only betraying his wife. He failed to realize that by building a secret life in the Ozarks with stolen funds, he was systematically dismantling the only stable emotional foundation his daughter had ever known. He taught her, through his actions, that trust is transactional, and that manipulation is an acceptable tool for survival. Candace was not Harper's biological mother, yet she was the only adult in this narrative who possessed a genuine maternal instinct. When the financial demolition was triggered and Derek's empire collapsed at the ticketing counter, Candace did not leave Harper in the blast radius to fend for herself. She calmly booked a flight, brought the teenager back to Missouri, and offered her a quiet, unbothered sanctuary. More importantly, Candace protected Harper's college savings fund, legally shielding it from her father's impending criminal restitution. She did not do this to win favor, to spite Derek, or to play the role of a savior. She did it because it was fundamentally fair. This reveals a critical, often overlooked lesson in family responsibility. True guidance is not about shielding a child from the consequences of life. It is about shielding them from the collateral damage of other people's sins. Candace sat with a weeping 16-year-old at a granite kitchen island and did not offer her empty platitudes. She did not say, "Your father is a good man who made a mistake." She acknowledged the devastating reality of the situation without making the child responsible for fixing it. That is emotional awareness in its purest form. It is the rare ability to hold space for a child's immense grief while simultaneously maintaining absolute rigid boundaries against the person who caused it. Here is a viewpoint that actively subverts our traditional cultural programming. The real tragedy for a child is not a broken home. The real tragedy is an unbroken home built entirely on a foundation of deceit. Conventional wisdom insists that divorce is the ultimate trauma for a developing mind. We lament the fractured holidays, the divided assets, and the separate addresses, assuming the child is permanently scarred by the separation. We are told to stay together for the kids, operating under the delusion that protecting children means hiding the ugly truths of adulthood from them. We call it preserving their innocence, but shielding a child from the reality of a toxic, manipulative parent does not protect them. It gaslights them. It teaches them to ignore their own intuition when they sense the tension in the hallway. It teaches them that a beautiful facade is more important than structural integrity. When Candace allowed Derek's financial fraud to be exposed, rather than covering it up to save face, she gave Harper the most agonizing, yet valuable gift a parent can offer a teenager heading into adulthood: the truth. By letting the false idols of Derek and Valerie fall, Candace taught Harper what real character looks like in the face of adversity. She taught her that a woman does not have to accept betrayal just to keep the peace at the dinner table. She taught her that self-respect is not negotiable, and that starting over with nothing but the truth is infinitely better than living comfortably inside a lie. These are the long-term, generational lessons that prevent a 16-year-old girl from growing up to marry a man who treats her exactly the way her father treated his wife. If this reflection resonates with the quiet, unacknowledged battles you are fighting in your own home, if you have ever had to be the anchor in a violent storm that someone else carelessly created, you are not walking this path alone. There is a vast community of people who understand the heavy, silent work of rebuilding a life from the ground up, honoring truth over tradition. I encourage you to subscribe and follow Melissa Told Stories. Here, we continue to explore these hidden corners of family dynamics, betrayal, and the profound, quiet strength it takes to reclaim your own narrative. Join us and let's keep untangling the truth together. As we look at the wreckage of Derek's illusions and the subsequent quiet peace of Candace's Missouri farm, we are left with a haunting realization about the nature of the families we build. We spend our entire lives bending over backward, sacrificing our own peace, desperately trying to give our children the pristine, picture-perfect parents society demands. We exhaust ourselves trying to keep the portrait in the frame intact. But perhaps the greatest, most profound act of love we can ever offer a child is the permission to mourn the parents they never actually had, and the courage to walk away from the ones who refuse to carry their own weight. Blood merely makes you related. Accountability, integrity, and radical honesty, those are the only materials strong enough to make you family. Look closely at the walls of your own home and listen to the floorboards beneath your feet. Are you building your legacy on solid rock? Or are you just waiting for the sand to finally give way?